Story 1, The Breathing Trees. The spruce trees along Highway 93 were exhaling when Patricia Donovan noticed their rhythm matched her own breathing. She'd been watching them for the past 11 miles through northern Montana, the way their branches swayed despite the absolute stillness of the February night. And now she realized with cold certainty that they were inhaling when she inhaled, exhaling when she exhaled. When she held her breath, they stopped moving entirely. When she gasped, they shuddered. Patricia had been hauling refrigerated pharmaceuticals for 19 years, and she'd driven this route between Kalispell and the Canadian border 47 times. She knew every curve, every grade, every scenic overlook. She'd never seen the trees breathe before. She tried to focus on the road, on the white lines disappearing under her Freightliner's hood, on anything except the forest that was somehow synchronized with her lungs. The temperature outside was 7 degrees below zero. Inside her cab, it was 72 degrees, but she felt cold spreading through her chest like frost forming on glass. She switched off the CB radio. Static had been building for the past hour, ever since she'd passed through Eureka, a wet, crackling sound that reminded her of meat thawing. The clock on her dashboard read 2:47 a.m., March 2nd, 2024. She was making good time. She'd be at the distribution center in Lethbridge by dawn if she maintained her current pace. The load in her reefer trailer was worth $340,000. Insulin, mostly, and some experimental immunotherapy drugs that required constant temperature maintenance at exactly 38 degrees Fahrenheit. The refrigeration unit hummed its reliable drone behind her. Patricia glanced at the trees again. A massive cedar on her right bent toward the road as she passed, its branches reaching like fingers trying to touch her trailer. She accelerated, pushing from 65 to 70 miles per hour. The cedar straightened as she moved away, but ahead, a cluster of pines leaned inward, creating an archway over the highway. She was about to drive through a tunnel of trees that shouldn't be able to bend that way, not in winter, not with trunks 3 feet thick. Her foot hovered over the brake. The trees were forming words. She could see it now, the way they arranged themselves in patterns, the negative space between branches spelling something in the darkness. Her headlights caught the message, pull over, pull over, pull over. Each repetition was formed by different trees, the words stretching for hundreds of yards ahead of her. She didn't pull over. She pushed the accelerator harder, engine roaring, and smashed through the first archway. Branches scraped her trailer with sounds like fingernails on metal. The refrigeration unit's pitch changed, dropping half an octave. The temperature gauge on her dashboard flickered. 38 degrees, then 41, then 35, then 52. The numbers spun randomly while the forest pressed closer to the road. Patricia's CB radio turned itself back on. Through the static came breathing, not human breathing, something with too much depth, like air moving through a cave system. The breathing matched the trees' movement perfectly. She grabbed the radio handset and screamed into it. "This is northbound 347 on Highway 93. I need assistance. There's something wrong with—" The static swallowed her words. When she released the talk button, the breathing continued, but now it was coming from her own mouth. She wasn't controlling it anymore. Something else was breathing through her lungs, using her diaphragm, expanding her chest with alien rhythm. She tried to hold her breath again. Her body refused. Air kept moving in and out, while the trees swayed in perfect synchronization. The forest was a single massive organism, and she was part of it now, just another component of its respiratory system. Her hands gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. Her rig weighed 80,000 pounds fully loaded. She was doing 73 miles per hour. She could survive a crash if she aimed for the shoulder. Let the momentum carry her through the trees and out the other side of whatever this was. But what if there was no other side? What if she'd already left the real Highway 93 behind, miles back, and this was somewhere else entirely? The thought hit her like a physical blow. She checked her GPS. The screen showed her position correctly, a blue dot moving north along the familiar red line. But when she looked at the estimated arrival time, it read, calculating, calculating, calculating. The device had never failed before. The trees were getting closer. Their roots were erupting from the frozen ground, crawling across the asphalt like arthritic fingers. Patricia swerved to avoid a massive root system that burst through the road surface directly ahead, sending chunks of asphalt spinning into the darkness. Her trailer fish-tailed, jackknifing slightly before. She corrected. The refrigeration unit's alarm began screaming. Temperature critical, temperature critical. The pharmaceuticals were ruining. All $340,000 worth destroyed because the forest wanted her to breathe with it. Ahead, the road was splitting, not branching, literally splitting down the middle, the two halves separating like a zipper opening. Between them grew a tree she'd never seen before, something ancient and massive, its bark covered in patterns that looked like screaming faces. It was growing impossibly fast, visible growth, trunk expanding, branches reaching, roots spreading. In 5 seconds, it would block the entire highway. She had 3 choices: left shoulder, right shoulder, or straight through the tree. Patricia chose the tree. She slammed the accelerator to the floor, activated her Jake brake to build compression, and aimed her 80,000-pound missile directly at the trunk. The speedometer hit 80, 82, 85. The tree's faces watched her approach with hollow eyes. She could hear them screaming now, thousands of voices crying out through her CB radio, through her own throat, through the very air itself. The breathing that controlled her lungs was accelerating, hyperventilating, panicking as she approached. Impact came with a sound like the world breaking. Her windshield exploded inward. Airbags deployed, slamming her against the seat. The cab tilted, rolled, metal shrieking and tearing. Her trailer disconnected, momentum carrying it sideways off the road. She was spinning, tumbling through darkness and branches and something else, something that felt like tissue, organic matter that gave way beneath her wheels with wet, tearing sounds. The forest wasn't just breathing. It was made of lungs. She was inside a respiratory system, the size of a mountain range. When her rig finally stopped moving, she was upside down. Blood ran up her face, pooling in her hairline. Her seatbelt had held, leaving her suspended in the inverted cab. Through the shattered windshield, she could see she'd come to rest inside a cavern formed by interwoven tree roots. Except they weren't roots. They were bronchioles, branching airways, slick with mucus that dripped from the ceiling in long strands. The walls pulsed rhythmically. She could smell it now, the wet, organic stink of the inside of lungs. Her passenger door was torn off. Cold air poured in, but it wasn't February cold. It was body temperature air, humid and thick, the exhalation of something vast. Patricia unfastened her seatbelt and dropped onto the cab's ceiling, then crawled through the missing door. The ground outside was spongy, yielding under her boots. She stood in a forest that bore no resemblance to Highway 93. The trees here were inverted, roots reaching toward a sky she couldn't see, trunks disappearing into a ground made of muscular tissue. She tried to run but couldn't tell which direction was which. Every step felt like walking on flesh. The breathing was louder here all around her, coming from everywhere and nowhere. She realized she still couldn't control her own breathing. Her lungs expanded and contracted in time with the forest organism, and now she understood. She hadn't driven into it. It had inhaled her, drawn her in with the natural suction of inspiration. She was deep inside something's respiratory system, and eventually it would exhale. The exhalation began 3 hours later, or maybe 3 minutes, or maybe 3 days. Time felt wrong in this place. Patricia felt the pressure change first, a massive compression that forced her to her knees. The tissue ground convulsed. The tree bronchioles contracted. Air began moving in the opposite direction, pushing her back toward the surface. She scrambled forward, fighting against the hurricane-force wind, but it was impossible. The exhalation lifted her off her feet, sent her tumbling back through the organic cavern, through narrowing passages that squeezed and compressed her. She was going to be expelled. The thought should have brought relief, but she knew with instinctive certainty that she wouldn't survive being breathed out. Whatever came out wouldn't be entirely Patricia Donovan anymore. The wind was too strong, the pressure too great, and she could feel herself changing as she tumbled through the flesh tunnel, feel her ribs spreading, her lungs expanding beyond their normal capacity, her chest cavity becoming something larger, more cavernous. She was becoming part of the breathing apparatus, transforming into another component of the organism's vast respiratory system. When she finally shot out into the open air, she landed on Highway 93 at mile marker 267. Her rig was gone. The road was intact, no splits, no destroyed asphalt. The trees stood normal and still in the February night. Her watch read 2:52 a.m. March 2nd, 2024. Only 5 minutes had passed since she'd first noticed the trees breathing. A southbound truck roared past her, air horn blaring. At the woman standing in the middle of the northbound lane. Patricia walked to the shoulder. Her chest hurt. When she looked down at her jacket, she saw it was torn open, and beneath it, her rib cage was visible through her skin, bones moving with each breath like branches in wind. Her lungs were too large now, pressing against organs that had to shift aside to accommodate them. She could breathe in more air than any human should hold, and when she exhaled, the trees along the highway swayed in response. She pulled out her phone to call for help, but when she unlocked the screen, her GPS app was open, showing her location. According to the map, she was exactly where she should be. But there was a new icon on the display, pulsing red, a pair of lungs, and beneath it, text that made her hands shake, respiratory checkpoint alpha, 2,847 active NODES. You are node 2,848. A semi-truck appeared from the north, headlights cutting through the darkness. Patricia watched it approach. The driver would see her standing on the shoulder. He would stop, probably ask if she needed help. She would get in his truck, and she would breathe, and he would breathe, and somewhere miles ahead, the trees would begin to sway. The forest was always looking for new nodes, new components for its massive, distributed respiratory system. It had taken her. Now it would help her take others. Patricia stood perfectly still as the truck passed without stopping. The driver hadn't seen her, or had chosen not to see her, or was already part of the system himself. She wasn't sure which. She walked north along the shoulder, toward Canada, breathing deeply, watching the trees breathe with her. Behind her, very faintly, she could hear the sound of her refrigeration unit alarm still screaming, though her trailer was gone and the pharmaceuticals inside had almost certainly frozen or cooked beyond usefulness. The alarm faded as she walked, replaced by a new sound. Hundreds of other alarms, distant and overlapping, coming from all directions at once. The forest had 2,848 nodes now. It would have more by morning. Patricia breathed in, and across 17 states and 3 provinces, trees swayed in perfect unison. She breathed out, and somewhere a trucker on I-90 noticed the pines were moving wrong, and somewhere else a driver en route 2 saw branches forming words. And in another location entirely, Highway 95 began to split down the middle. The respiratory system was expanding. It would continue expanding until every road through every forest was part of it, until every driver who passed through breathed in synchronization, until the organism's lungs covered the continent. Patricia walked north, breathing, becoming the forest, letting the forest become her, and tried not to think about what would happen when the whole system held its breath at once. Story 2. The Passenger Mirror. The face in Dennis Kowalski's passenger side mirror wasn't his reflection, and it hadn't been for the past 43 miles of Colorado's Highway 285. He kept glancing at it, watching the stranger stare back from the glass, a gaunt man with hollow eyes and skin like wet paper, mouth opening and closing as if speaking words Dennis couldn't hear. The stranger matched Dennis's movements perfectly. When Dennis adjusted his baseball cap, the stranger's hand rose to his own head. When Dennis reached for his coffee, the stranger's arm extended toward something outside the mirror's frame. But the face was wrong. The face was never Dennis's face. It started just south of Fairplay at 1:33 a.m., January 18, 2024. Dennis had been hauling auto parts from Denver to Alamosa, a route he'd driven probably 200 times in his 16 years behind the wheel. Straightforward run, good roads when weather cooperated, and tonight the weather was cooperating. Clear skies, temperature holding at 19 degrees, no wind. He'd been adjusting his passenger mirror, trying to see if his trailer was kicking up any debris, when he noticed the reflection was slightly off. Not his reflection, someone else. At first he'd thought it was a trick of the darkness, his tired brain filling in details that weren't there. But then the stranger in the mirror had smiled at him, a slow spreading of lips that revealed too many teeth, arranged in too many rows, like a shark's mouth grafted onto a human face. Dennis had nearly driven off the road. He'd pulled over at mile marker 193, put the rig in neutral, and stared at the passenger mirror for a full 2 minutes while his heart tried to punch through his sternum. The stranger stared back, unblinking. Behind the stranger's head, Dennis could see his trailer perfectly normal, could see the road, the snow-dusted pines, the star-scattered sky, all exactly as they should be. But where Dennis's own face should have appeared, there was this gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger wearing Dennis's jacket, sitting in Dennis's seat, driving Dennis's truck. When Dennis waved his hand in front of his face, the stranger's hand appeared in the mirror, moving in perfect synchronization. But the hand was wrong, too. Fingers too long, knuckles too prominent, nails yellowed and cracked. Dennis had grabbed his phone, opened the camera app, and switched to selfie mode. His own face looked back from the phone screen, 52 years old, heavy beard, bloodshot eyes from too many consecutive shifts, but unmistakably him. He'd held the phone up to the passenger mirror, trying to capture the stranger's reflection. Through the phone's camera, the mirror showed his normal reflection. But when he looked directly at the mirror itself, the stranger was still there, mouth opening and closing, trying to communicate something urgent. He'd radioed other drivers. The CB was quiet, dead air at this hour on this stretch. But eventually a woman's voice responded. "Yeah, I'm 10 miles south of you northbound. What's your 20? Dennis had explained his situation, trying to sound rational, not like a man losing his mind. Long pause, then, "Buddy, you okay? You sound like you need some sleep. There's a rest stop in about 15 miles, maybe pull over, get some coffee." He tried to explain again, but she'd signed off, probably convinced he was hallucinating from exhaustion. Maybe he was. Dennis had put the rig back in gear and resumed driving, trying to ignore the passenger mirror entirely. But ignoring it was impossible. Peripheral vision kept catching movement in the glass. The stranger was gesturing now, pointing at something behind Dennis's head, jabbing one elongated finger repeatedly toward the sleeper berth. Dennis had no sleeper berth. His Kenworth was a day cab, just the front seats, no compartment behind them. But when he'd turned to look, he'd seen it. A curtained opening that definitely hadn't existed before, leading into darkness that somehow fit inside his truck's cab. He'd turned back to the road, hands shaking. Highway 285 stretched ahead through the Rio Grande National Forest, absolutely straight for the next several miles. No other vehicles visible. The tree line on both sides was dense, impenetrable, branches forming walls of shadow despite his headlights. Dennis checked his driver's side mirror, his own reflection, normal, terrified. Checked the passenger mirror. The stranger, still pointing, mouth forming words that looked like "look behind you, look behind you, look behind you." Dennis did not look behind him. Whatever was in his non-existent sleeper berth could stay there. He pushed the accelerator, building speed to 75, 80, 85 miles per hour. The speed limit was 65 through this section, but he needed to outrun whatever was happening, needed to reach a Limosa where there would be lights and people and sanity. His engine roared, trailer rattling over the imperfect road surface. In the passenger mirror, the stranger was now screaming silently, face contorted, one hand reaching forward as if trying to grab Dennis through the glass. Behind Dennis, he heard the curtain rustle, fabric against fabric, something moving in the space that shouldn't exist. The temperature in his cab dropped 20 degrees in 3 seconds. His breath became visible, condensing in clouds. The windshield began frosting over from the inside, ice crystals spreading in fractal patterns. He cranked the heater to maximum. It blew cold air that smelled like soil and decay. The stranger in the passenger mirror was weeping now, tears running down those hollow cheeks, mouth still forming words. "Look behind you." Dennis's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, the small one mounted on his windshield, angled to show the area directly behind his seat. In that mirror, he could see the curtained opening, and now he could see something emerging from it. A hand, then another hand. Both hands were his own. Same scars on the knuckles from a chain repair 3 years ago. Same wedding ring he still wore, though Martha had died in 2017. The hands reached forward toward the back of Dennis's head. Dennis screamed and swerved, nearly jackknifing his trailer. The hands in the rearview mirror moved with him, maintaining their distance, always inches from his skull. He straightened out, heart slamming, and made a decision. He reached up and ripped the rearview mirror off its mount, threw it out his window into the darkness. There, problem solved. If he couldn't see what was behind him, it couldn't touch him. That wasn't how reality worked, but nothing about this situation was reality anyway. In the passenger mirror, the stranger was shaking his head violently, expression pure terror. Then the stranger's eyes shifted, looking at something to his right, Dennis's left. Dennis turned his head and saw his driver's side mirror. In it, his own reflection had changed. It was still his face, but the eyes were empty sockets, mouth hanging open in a silent scream. As he watched, his mirror self's head bent, and turning backward, rotating beyond any natural range, turning 180 degrees until it faced the wrong direction entirely. Both side mirrors were wrong now. The stranger in the passenger mirror was thrashing, trying to break through the glass. The hollow-eyed version of Dennis in the driver's mirror was reaching out of the frame, one arm extending impossibly from the glass surface, fingers grasping. And behind real Dennis, he could feel breath on his neck, his own breath, somehow both his and not his, warm and moist and carrying a whisper. "We've been waiting for you to notice us." Dennis slammed the brakes. The rig shuddered, ABS engaging, tires screaming. He grabbed his flashlight, kicked open his door, and jumped down to the pavement. The January cold hit him like a wall. He stumbled away from his truck, putting 20 feet between himself and the Kenworth, and turned to look at it. From outside, everything appeared normal. His truck, his trailer, sitting on Highway 285 with no other vehicles in sight. The passenger mirror reflected the forest, the stars, the road. The driver's mirror showed his truck's side, both perfectly ordinary. But Dennis knew better. He approached the passenger side carefully, flashlight raised like a weapon. As he got closer, he could see the stranger in the mirror again, but now the stranger was outside the truck, standing exactly where Dennis was standing, raising a flashlight that mirrored Dennis's own movements. Dennis waved his left hand. The stranger waved his left hand. Dennis took a step forward. The stranger took a step forward. They moved in perfect synchronization, and Dennis realized with crawling horror that he wasn't looking at a reflection anymore. He was looking through the mirror into another Highway 285, where another Dennis was having the same experience, standing outside his own truck, looking into his own passenger mirror, seeing yet another Dennis in yet another reflection. How many layers deep was he? How many Dennises were stacked like nested dolls, each one looking at the next, each one convinced they were the original? He walked around the truck to the driver's side. That mirror showed him normally his actual reflection. But when he looked closely, he could see his eyes. They were hollow, empty sockets, just like the reflection he'd seen moments ago. He raised his hand to his face, touched his eyes. They felt normal, solid, present. But in the mirror they were voids, and when he leaned close, he could see something moving in those voids, something writhing in the space where his eyes should be. Dennis ran. He didn't know where he was running, into the forest, away from the road, boots crunching through snow and frozen undergrowth. He could hear his truck's engine still idling behind him, could hear something else too, multiple sets of footsteps, all matching his own rhythm, pursuing him through the trees. He risked a glance backward and saw them, 7 versions of himself, each slightly different, each wearing progressively wronger versions of his face. The nearest one had eyes that were too large. The next had a mouth that split his face in half. The third had hands where his ears should be. They were all Dennis, all reflections pulled from mirrors and given substance, and they were all reaching for him. He burst through the tree line into a clearing and stopped. In the center of the clearing was a truck. His truck. Same Kenworth, same trailer, same license plate, parked as if he'd driven it there himself. He approached cautiously. The driver's door was open. Inside, slumped over the steering wheel, was Dennis Kowalski, dead. Had been dead for what looked like days, skin gray, eyes clouded. The corpse's CB handset was still in its hand, frozen in the act of calling for help. Behind the corpse, the sleeper berth curtain was open, revealing the compartment that shouldn't exist. Dennis could see into it now. A long corridor lined with mirrors on both sides, each mirror showing a different version of Highway 285, a different Dennis driving through a different night. Thousands of mirrors, maybe millions, each containing another reflection, another possibility, another moment where Dennis had looked into his passenger mirror and seen something wrong. The Dennis reflections caught up to him. They surrounded him in the clearing, 7 different versions, all wearing his face in varying states of corruption. The nearest one spoke, voice exactly like Dennis's own. "You noticed us. That was your mistake. Most drivers never look closely at their mirrors. They see themselves and accept it. But you looked, and looking created a crack, and now we can come through." Dennis backed against his truck, the truck with his corpse inside, and understood. He died. Maybe hours ago, maybe days. Some accident on Highway 285, something that killed him instantly, and his mind in that final moment had fled into the mirrors, trying to escape, fragmenting across infinite reflections. Dennis surrounding him was a piece of his dying consciousness, splinters of his final thoughts, given form by panic and mirror glass. The real Dennis was in the truck, dead at the wheel. Everything since mile marker 193 had been the cascade of a mind coming apart. But if he was dead, why could he still feel the cold? Why did fear still taste like copper in his mouth? The wrongest Dennis reflection stepped forward, the one with hands for ears. It reached out and touched his chest. Where it touched, Dennis felt himself becoming less solid, less certain. "We need you to drive," the reflection said. "All of us. We need a body that still works, even if it's just a memory of a body. We need to finish the route. We need to deliver the cargo." Dennis looked at his trailer. The doors were open. Inside, instead of auto parts, he saw mirrors, thousands of mirrors packed tight, each one reflecting a different Highway 285, a different trucker, a different moment of realization. The cargo wasn't auto parts. It had never been auto parts. He was hauling reflections, delivering fractured consciousness to some destination he couldn't name, and he'd been doing it for longer than he could remember. Every route, every delivery, every time he'd checked his mirrors and seen himself staring back. How many times had he died? How many times had he noticed the reflections were wrong, fled into the mirror space, forgotten he was dead, and started driving again? The reflections merged with him, all seven at once, pouring into his body, filling the spaces between his atoms with wrongness. Dennis screamed, but the sound that came out wasn't his voice. It was seven voices overlapping, each slightly out of sync. He tried to run again, but his legs moved in seven different directions simultaneously, each one controlled by a different fragment. He collapsed in the snow, body contorting, bones bending in angles bones shouldn't bend. When he finally stopped moving, something stood up that wore Dennis Kowalski's shape but wasn't Dennis anymore. It walked to the Kenworth, climbed into the driver's seat next to the corpse, its own corpse, and pushed the body aside. The corpse tumbled out of the cab and landed in the snow with a wet sound. The thing that had been Dennis put the truck in gear and pulled back onto Highway 285, heading south, completing its route, hauling its cargo of mirrors and reflections and fractured minds. In the passenger mirror, the gaunt stranger was gone. The mirror showed empty road, dark forest, normal night. But if anyone looked closely, really looked the way Dennis had looked, they would see seven faces layered over each other in that reflection, all moving slightly differently, all watching the road with hollow eyes. The truck drove through the night, making its delivery, and by morning it would pick up another load, another cargo of impossible things, and the driver would check his mirrors and see himself and never notice that himself was seven different people wearing the same disintegrating face. Back in the clearing, Dennis Kowalski's corpse lay in the snow, gradually freezing, wedding ring glinting on one dead finger. By dawn, hunters would find it and call the police, who would investigate and determine he'd wandered from his truck in some kind of episode. Exhaustion, maybe, or a stroke, and died of exposure. They would never find his truck. It was already 200 miles south, making its delivery, and the driver would check his mirrors at every turn, seeing seven faces staring back, each one slowly realizing what they'd become, each one beginning to scream behind the glass where no one could hear them, where their screams would echo forever in the infinite reflections of Highway 285's midnight run. Story 3. The mile marker that counts down. Mile marker 247 appeared in Yolanda Chen's headlights at 3:41 a.m., and that was wrong because she'd just passed mile marker 247 3 miles back. She slowed her Peterbilt from 60 to 45, staring at the sign as it approached. White numbers on green reflective background, regulation size, mounted at regulation height. Mile marker 247, Interstate 90, eastbound through the Black Hills of South Dakota, February 9, 2024. Except this marker had a detail the previous one hadn't. Beneath the numbers in smaller text, it read repeat again. Yolanda had been hauling agricultural equipment from Gillette, Wyoming to Sioux Falls, disc harrows and cultivators, 28,000 pounds of farm implements that smelled like grease and metal. She'd driven this route probably 60 times, knew every hill and curve. Mile markers should increase going east. 244, 245, 246, 247, and so on toward the South Dakota border. They should not repeat. And they definitely should not include ominous subtitles. She grabbed her logbook, checked her notes. She definitely passed 247 already, had marked it specifically because that was where she planned to stop for fuel in Spear. Another 16 miles ahead at marker 263. But here was 247 again, and her GPS confirmed she was exactly where the marker said she was, between exits 247 and 248. The distance to Spearfish still read 16 miles. Something about the geometry was impossible, but her instruments insisted it was correct. Mile marker 248 came up 2 miles later, then 249, then 247 again. This time the subtitle read repeat 3x. Her odometer said she'd traveled 6 miles since the first anomalous 247. Her GPS still showed her on I-90, progressing normally, except the map was now showing 3 separate positions for her truck, stacked on top of each other, 3 blue dots occupying the same stretch of highway. Yolanda's skin went cold. She'd heard stories from other drivers. Everyone had. The CB radio legends about ghost trucks and phantom hitchhikers. But she'd always filed those under bullshit designed to scare rookies. She radioed anyway. This is eastbound Interstate 90-mile marker. Hell, I don't even know anymore. Anyone else out here seeing anything weird with the markers? Static answered. Deep, rumbling static that sounded almost like words if words could be spoken by something with a throat made of gravel. She tried again. Breaker, breaker, anyone on this channel? The static shifted pitch, and through it came a voice, her own voice, but distant and distorted. Turn around, count up, not down. Turn around while you can. Yolanda did not turn around. Turning around on the interstate was illegal, dangerous, and would add 3 hours to her delivery schedule. She was already behind because of weather delays in Wyoming. Her dispatcher would lose his mind if she called and said she was heading backward because the mile markers were behaving strangely. She'd sound insane. Maybe she was insane. Maybe carbon monoxide was leaking from somewhere, poisoning her slowly, making her hallucinate impossible road signs. She cracked her window despite the February cold. Air rushed in sharp and clean, smelling like pine and snow. Her head cleared slightly, but mile marker 247 appeared again, now reading repeat 6x beneath the numbers. 6 times. She passed the same marker 6 times, traveling steadily east, and somehow that made sense to her instruments if not to reality. The forest on both sides of the highway was moving wrong. Yolanda noticed it gradually. The way the pine trees seemed closer than they'd been, crowding the road, branches reaching over the asphalt. The tree line should be at least 30 feet back on either side. Now it was maybe 10 feet, now 5. The trees were migrating inward, and she couldn't tell if they were actually moving or if the road was narrowing, space itself compressing around the highway until the path ahead was barely wide enough for her truck. She touched her brakes. Her rig was 73 feet long, weighed 48,000 pounds loaded. If the road kept narrowing, she'd be stuck, wedged between trees with nowhere to go. But braking felt wrong too, like surrendering to whatever was happening. She maintained her speed, 45 miles per hour through increasingly claustrophobic space, branches scraping her trailer with sounds like claws on metal. Mile marker 247 appeared again. Repeat 12x12 times. She'd been driving for what felt like 30 minutes since the anomaly started, should be way past Spearfish by now, but she was still trapped in this same 3-mile loop, passing the same marker, watching it count how many times she'd failed to escape. The subtitle was changing, though, growing longer. This time it read, "Repeat 12x turn around now. Last warning." Yolanda's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was not turning around. Whatever this was, hallucination, anomaly, practical joke by some asshole with too much time. She would not let it control her. She'd been driving trucks for 11 years, survived ice storms and brake failures, and a rollover in 2019 that should have killed her. Some weird mile markers weren't going to make her break the law by driving the wrong direction on the interstate. Mile marker 247 appeared. Repeat 24x, the number had doubled. Time was accelerating somehow, each loop completing faster than the last. Or maybe she'd passed through 12 more repetitions without noticing, her mind glossing over the impossible routine. The trees were now directly beside her truck, no shoulder remaining, trunks and branches forming a tunnel of vegetation around I-90. Her headlights reflected off bark and needles, creating a strobe effect that made her dizzy. Something darted across the road, a deer maybe, or something deer-shaped. She swerved slightly, heard her trailer clip a tree trunk. Metal shrieked. She overcorrected, felt the whole rig shimmy, brought it back under control through sheer muscle memory. Behind her, she heard cargo shifting. The disc harrows were heavy, secured with straps, but a hard enough impact could break them loose. Tie 8,000 pounds of loose farm equipment inside a metal box traveling 45 miles per hour. If the cargo came apart, the trailer would destabilize, and she'd jackknife. Mile marker 247. Repeat 48x, the trees were inside her cab. That was impossible, but she could see branches pushing through the firewall, growing through the dashboard, pine needles brushing her arms as she tried to steer. The whole world was becoming forest, the distinction between road and woodland blurring. Her tires were driving on something soft now, not asphalt, pine needles, moss, decomposing leaves. But her GPS still insisted she was on Interstate 90, still showed her 3 positions stacked on top of each other, still said Spearfish was 16 miles ahead. The voice on her CB radio returned, clearer now. "You have to count backward, that's the rule. When markers stop counting up, you count down. Drive backward through the loop, only way out." It was definitely her voice, but older, strained, speaking from some future or alternate timeline where she'd figured this out too late. Yolanda made a decision. She slammed her brakes, bringing the rig to a full stop. The trees pressed against her doors, holding her trapped. She put the transmission in reverse. Backing up a 73-foot truck with a 40-foot trailer was difficult under ideal circumstances. Doing it through dense forest on a highway that shouldn't exist was probably impossible. She didn't care. The rules had changed. She would change with them. She reversed slowly, watching her mirrors, trying to navigate by memory. Mile marker 247 appeared behind her, moving toward her as she backed up. The subtitle now read, "Correct. Continue." Relief flooded her chest. She kept reversing. Mile marker 249 appeared, then 248, They were counting in the wrong direction now because she was moving in the wrong direction, and somehow that was correct. That was following the new rules of this impossible road. She reversed for what felt like hours. Her odometer ran backward, subtracting miles. Her GPS showed her blue dot moving westward, away from Sioux Falls, back toward Wyoming. The trees gradually retreated, giving her space again. The forest stopped growing through her dashboard. By the time she reached mile marker 244, the road was normal again. Standard interstate, proper shoulders, regulation tree line. Yolanda stopped, shifted into drive, and sat shaking for 5 full minutes. Her logbook said she'd been driving for 6 hours. Her clock said only 40 minutes had passed since she'd first seen the anomalous 247. Her GPS now showed a single blue dot, correctly positioned. Everything was normal except her odometer, which had lost 83 miles, and her fuel gauge, which had dropped from 3/4 full to nearly empty despite the impossible math. She drove forward, mile marker 245, then 246, then 247 with no subtitle, just the numbers. Relief turned to triumph. She'd beaten it, whatever it was. She'd escaped the loop by playing by its inverse rules. Mile marker 248, then 249. The spearfish exit appeared at marker 263, exactly where it should be. She took it, pulled into a truck stop, and just sat in her parked rig, breathing, trying to process what had happened. Other trucks surrounded her, normal drivers making normal deliveries. She went inside, bought coffee, stood by the counter. A weathered driver, 70 years old if he was a day, was telling a story to a younger guy. And the mile markers started counting down instead of up, see? That's when I knew I was in trouble. You gotta drive backward through those loops, that's the only way out. Happened to me back in '97, right here on I-90. Yolanda's coffee fell from her hands, shattered on the floor. The old driver looked over, met her eyes, and nodded slowly. "You just came from there," he said, not a question. "From the backward stretch, I can tell by your face." She nodded mutely. He walked over. Story 4, the cargo that screams in sleep. The screaming started when Raymond Voss fell asleep at a rest stop outside Boise. And when he jolted awake 17 minutes later, the screaming was coming from inside his sealed trailer. He'd been hauling what the manifest said was industrial textiles, rolls of fabric, supposedly, from a warehouse in Portland to a distribution center in Salt Lake City. 23,000 pounds of cloth that shouldn't make any sound at all, much less the raw-throated shrieking that was rattling his trailer walls at 4:15 a.m. on December 21st, 2023. Raymond had been driving for 14 years, and he'd learned not to ask too many questions about cargo. You picked it up, you delivered it, you collected your payment. The warehouse in Portland had been unmarked, the loading done by workers who wouldn't make eye contact, and the paperwork had more redactions than information. But the pay was triple his usual rate, and his daughter needed braces and his ex-wife knee. Aided child support, and Raymond needed to not think too hard about sealed trailers and cash payments. He climbed out of his Volvo's cab, circled around to the trailer. The screaming was louder here, multiple voices overlapping, men, women, children, all shrieking in perfect unison. The trailer's doors were locked with a seal he'd been instructed not to break. The walls were standard aluminum, 48 feet long, refrigerated unit on top running at 55 degrees. Nothing about the exterior suggested it contained anything except textile rolls. But the screaming was undeniable. So loud he was amazed no one else at the rest stop was reacting. He looked around. 3 other trucks were parked in the lot, drivers presumably sleeping. The rest stop's bathroom lights were on, fluorescent and harsh. A car sat near the building, engine off. Everything normal, everyone ignoring the screaming that sounded like torture, like dozens of people being murdered simultaneously inside his trailer. Raymond walked to the nearest truck, knocked on the door. No response. He knocked harder. The door opened 6 inches, and a driver peered out, woman maybe 40, exhausted eyes. "What?" "You hear that?" Raymond pointed at his trailer. "The screaming." She stared at him. "Hear what?" The screaming was reaching a crescendo so loud Raymond's ears hurt. "That, from my trailer, the—" She shut her door, locked it. Through the window, he saw her grab her CB handset, probably calling the police on the crazy man. Raymond backed away, returned to his own rig. The screaming stopped. Instant silence, so abrupt his ears rang in the void. He stood listening to nothing. Maybe he'd imagined it, auditory hallucination from exhaustion. He'd been driving 11 hours straight, pushing his logbook limits. His brain was inventing sounds. That was the rational explanation. He climbed back into his cab, tried to settle in for another hour of sleep before continuing to Salt Lake City. He closed his eyes. The screaming started again. Louder. Close, not from the trailer, but from right beside him, as if someone was in the cab, pressed against his ear, shrieking directly into his auditory canal. Raymond's eyes snapped open. The cab was empty. But in his passenger seat, he saw an indentation, the cushion compressed as if under weight. And on the seat's surface, forming slowly like frost patterns, were words written in what looked like condensation. "They wake when you sleep." Raymond's hand shot to his keys, started the engine. He would drive without sleeping. He would complete the delivery right now, tonight, get this cargo out of his possession. Salt Lake City was 480 miles away. 7 hours if he pushed it. He could stay awake 7 hours. He pulled out of the rest stop, merged onto I-84 and pushed his speed to 75. The highway was empty, just his headlights cutting through Idaho darkness. Mountains rose on both sides, black shapes against marginally less black sky. Raymond cranked the radio, found a talk show, let someone's voice fill the cab so he wouldn't think about the indentation in his passenger seat or the words that were still visible, refusing to evaporate. His trailer's refrigeration unit hummed normally. No screaming. Everything was fine as long as he stayed awake. By mile marker 112, his eyes were burning. By mile marker 137, he was slapping his face to maintain focus. By marker 154, he caught himself drifting into the other lane. He needed caffeine, needed to stop, but stopping meant maybe sleeping, and sleeping meant the screaming would return. He passed a truck stop at marker 168, forced himself to continue. His body was lead. His eyelids weighed 1,000 pounds each. At marker 182, he micro-slepted. Just a second, maybe 2, eyes closing involuntarily. He jolted awake to the sound of screaming, not from the trailer now, but from the road itself, as if the asphalt was shrieking under his tires. He looked in his rearview mirror and saw them. people standing in the road behind him, dozens of them, translucent and flickering like bad projections. They were screaming, mouths open impossibly wide. And as he watched, his trailer drove through them, wheels passing through their immaterial bodies. Raymond swerved, overcorrected, nearly jackknifed. He brought the rig back under control, heart slamming. When he looked in the mirror again, the road was empty. But on his dashboard, new words were forming in the condensation that kept appearing. We are the cargo. We wake when you wake. We wake when you sleep. There is no safety. He grabbed his CB radio. Anyone, this is eastbound I-84. I don't know what I need. If anyone can hear this, the cargo I'm hauling is. Static swallowed his words. Through the static came the screaming, clearer now, and beneath it a voice. Raymond Voss, you agreed to transport us. You took the money, now drive. Who are you? Raymond's voice cracked. What am I really hauling? Witnesses. The voice said. People who saw things they shouldn't have seen. People who were made to disappear. We're in your trailer, Raymond. 47 of us, sealed in containers, drugged into paralysis, but conscious. We're still alive. We're screaming, and no one can hear us except you, and only when you sleep, because that's when your mind touches ours. Raymond's stomach turned to ice water. He looked at his manifest. Industrial textiles, but the shipping weight was 23,000 pounds. 47 human bodies would weigh maybe 7,000 pounds total. What else was in there? What were they sealed in? I'll let you out, he said. I'll break the seal right now, No, the voice was sharp. You'll kill us. The containers are pressurized. Open them wrong and we die. Drive to Salt Lake City. Deliver us to the facility. That's your only choice. But we need you to know what you're carrying. We need one person to witness us, even if you can't save us. Raymond's hands shook on the wheel. Triple payment. Cash, no questions asked. He'd known something was wrong. He'd taken the money anyway. What happens to you in Salt Lake City? Silence, then, nothing good. But maybe someone there will have a conscience. Maybe you'll have a conscience. Maybe you'll call someone before you deliver. Or maybe you'll just take your money and forget us like everyone else. The screaming stopped. The road became just a road again. Raymond drove in silence for 30 miles, thinking he could call the police, tell them he suspected human trafficking. But what if the voice was lying? What if it was a hallucination? What if he opened the trailer and found just textile rolls and got arrested for breaking a transport seal and lost his CDL and his livelihood? What if the voice was telling the truth and he did nothing? He pulled over at marker 231, grabbed his phone. His hand hovered over the keypad. Who would he call? 911. Hi, I think I'm trafficking kidnapped witnesses, but I only know because they scream in my head when I sleep. They'd think he was insane. He needed proof. He walked back to his trailer, examined the seal. Heavy duty, numbered, intact. He put his ear against the aluminum wall. Silence. He knocked. Nothing. Raymond climbed back in his cab and kept driving. He would deliver the cargo. He would take his money. He would forget this happened. That was the smart choice. The safe choice. His daughter needed braces. He needed to keep his job. Whatever was happening here was above his pay grade, beyond his control. But he couldn't stop thinking about 47 people, paralyzed and aware, sealed in containers, screaming where no one could hear them. He'd been tired before. Now he was wide awake, adrenaline burning through his exhaustion. The Utah border came up at marker 297, 200 miles to Salt Lake City, 3 hours. He had 3 hours to make a decision. At marker 341, he made it. He called 911. I'm reporting a possible kidnapping situation. I'm transporting cargo that I believe contains people against their will. My location is, the call dropped. He tried again, immediate disconnect, tried a third time. His phone showed full signal strength, but the call wouldn't connect. On his CB radio, static resolved into words. You can't call out Raymond. We won't let you drive. We, Raymond's voice was hoarse. Who we? The people who paid you triple rate. The people who own the facility in Salt Lake City. The people who are watching your truck through satellite right now, watching you try to be a hero. Your daughter Emily is at 447 Birch Street, apartment 2B, sleeping in her bed with the purple comforter. Your ex-wife Susan is in the next room. They're safe as long as you drive. Raymond's blood turned to slush. They just threatened his daughter, described her comforter, proven they could reach her. He looked at the GPS mounted on his dash. A new route had appeared, overriding his original destination. It was taking him to an address in Magna, Utah, west of Salt Lake City proper. The delivery time had changed to 6:00 a.m. sharp, 2 hours and 43 minutes away. He drove. What else could he do? His hands felt numb on the wheel. In his mirrors, he kept seeing the translucent people standing in the road, the ones he'd driven through. Witnesses. 47 people who'd seen something they shouldn't have. How many others had there been? How many other truckers had taken suspicious jobs for triple pay and delivered human cargo to unmarked facilities and gone home and never thought about it again? The voice on his CB had said maybe he'd have a conscience. Maybe he'd call someone. He'd tried. It hadn't worked. They'd threatened his daughter. He was one man in a truck, up against an organization that could track him by satellite and hack his phone and seal people in pressurized containers. What was he supposed to do? The screaming started again, even though he was awake. Raymond realized he'd been wrong. They didn't just wake when he slept. They woke when his resistance died, when he accepted what he was doing. They were screaming because he'd given up, because he was going to deliver them to whatever waited at the Magna facility, because he was choosing his daughter's safety over their lives. He understood now. That was the weight he'd carry forever, not the weight of the cargo, the weight of knowing. He took the exit for Magna at 5:47 a.m. The facility was exactly where the GPS said it would be. A low concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence, spotlights making the compound bright as noon despite the pre-dawn darkness. Guards at the gate, professional, armed. They opened the gate without asking for ID. Raymond's hands were shaking so badly he could barely steer. A man in a suit met him at the loading dock. Seal number. Raymond read the number off the trailer lock. The man checked his clipboard, nodded. Wait in your cab, we'll unload. Workers appeared with forklifts, broke the seal, opened the trailer doors. Raymond turned away. He didn't want to see what was inside, didn't want confirmation. He stared straight ahead while they unloaded, hearing only the mechanical sounds of forklifts and hydraulics, no screaming now, just terrible silence. 15 minutes later, the suit returned. Handed Raymond an envelope fat with cash. Your payment, you're free to go, forget you were here. Raymond took the envelope, started his engine. drove away from the facility through Magna back to the interstate. The envelope sat on his passenger seat, thick and heavy. He didn't open it. He knew exactly how much would be inside, triple rate, blood money, the price of his daughter's safety and his own cowardice. He drove 3 miles before pulling over, sat shaking on the shoulder while the sun came up. His trailer was empty now. His cargo delivered. Job complete. Except he could still hear them screaming, and he knew he would hear them screaming for the rest of his life. Every time he closed his eyes, every time he slept, every time he saw his daughter's face and remembered what he'd done to keep her safe. Raymond opened the envelope, counted the money. $30,000 in hundreds. He thought about throwing it in the dumpster. Thought about driving to the nearest police station and confessing everything. Thought about driving his rig into the mountain at 80 miles per hour and ending the screaming permanently. Instead, he put the money in his jacket, pulled back onto the interstate and headed home to Wyoming. Because he had child support to pay. Because his daughter needed braces. Because he needed to keep driving, keep working, keep pretending he was still a person who deserved to sleep without screaming. The facility in his rearview mirror grew smaller, disappeared, and Raymond drove into the morning with the weight of 47 witnesses pressing against his chest like a hand around his heart, squeezing, never letting go. The worst part was knowing he'd do it again, if they called him, if they offered triple rate, if his daughter needed something. He'd do it again, and the screaming would get louder, and eventually it wouldn't matter if he was awake or asleep because the screaming would be constant, a permanent frequency broadcast from the frequency of guilt into the radio station of his skull. He was already learning to live with it, already compartmentalizing, already becoming the kind of person who could transport human suffering for cash and keep driving. By the time he reached the Wyoming border, the sun was fully up, and Raymond Voss looked like any other trucker on the interstate. No one could see the screaming inside him. No one could hear the witnesses. He merged into morning traffic, just another vehicle in an endless stream, carrying his cargo of guilt toward a destination he'd never reach, following a route that never ended, driving forever through the landscape of his own complicity. Story 5, The Frost That Follows. The frost was following Malik Washington's truck, and it had been following him for 73 miles since he'd stopped at that abandoned gas station outside Grand Forks, North Dakota. He could see it in his mirrors, a wave of white ice spreading across the highway behind him, freezing the road surface, climbing the concrete barriers, coating the trees, advancing at exactly the speed he was traveling, 58 miles per hour. The frost matched him perfectly, maintaining a distance of maybe 40 feet, never getting closer, never falling behind. A pursuing wall of winter that turned everything in its path to frozen sculpture. It was January 31st, 2024, 11:47 p.m., and Malik had been hauling frozen foods from Fargo to Minneapolis. Standard run, route he'd driven 100 times in 7 years behind the wheel. The refrigeration unit was set to -10 degrees Fahrenheit, keeping the cargo, pizzas mostly, and some frozen vegetables, properly preserved. Outside temperature was 12 degrees. Normal winter night on I-29 through North Dakota. Everything had been normal until he'd stopped. The gas station had appeared in his headlights at mile marker 184. Abandoned building, parking lot cracked and overgrown, pumps long removed, leaving just concrete pads and phantom islands. But Malik had needed to check his trailer connection. He'd felt a slight shimmy in the coupling, and the station's parking lot offered space to pull off safely. He'd parked, grabbed his flashlight, circled his rig. The connection was fine, nothing wrong. He'd climbed back in the cab and noticed the frost. It had started at the gas station building. Ice crystals forming on the broken windows, spreading across the facade, coating the walls in seconds. Malik had watched it happen, rapid growth, like watching video in fast forward. Frost consuming the entire structure in maybe 10 seconds. Then it had kept spreading, reaching toward his truck, crawling across the parking lot pavement with that same impossible speed. He de-started his engine and pulled out fast, tires spinning slightly on the suddenly icy surface. The frost had followed. He'd watched it in his mirrors, a white line extending from the gas station, pursuing him onto the interstate, matching his speed exactly. At first he'd thought it was coincidence, maybe some weird weather phenomenon, cold front moving at highway speed. But weather didn't work like that. Weather didn't maintain perfect 40-foot distance. Weather didn't stop when you stopped and accelerate when you accelerated. Malik had tested it at mile marker 197. He'd slowed to 30 miles per hour. The frost slowed to 30. He'd sped up to 70. The frost accelerated, maintaining its distance. And behind it, everything froze solid: asphalt, barrier walls, signposts, trees. He could see the transformation in his mirrors. The highway going from normal winter road to something else, something crystalline and dead, a corridor of ice growing longer with every mile he traveled. He'd tried calling 911. His phone worked, signal was strong, but when he explained his situation, "There's a frost wave following my truck, freezing the highway behind me." The operator had been silent for a long moment, then suggested he pull over and rest. Trucker fatigue. He insisted it was real, tried to describe what he was seeing. She offered to send a patrol car. He'd given his location and kept driving, but no patrol car ever appeared. And when he'd called back 20 minutes later, the operator said there was no record of his previous call. His CB radio offered only static. Every channel just white noise that sounded almost like voices, whispering in rhythm with the frost's advance. Malik had checked his cargo, temperature holding steady at -10. The reefer unit was working normally. But when he looked at the trailer's external thermometer, the one that measured outside ambient temperature, the reading was dropping, 12 degrees when he'd started. Now it was showing -8, -12, -20. The air around his truck was being supercooled by the pursuing frost. At mile marker 224, another vehicle appeared ahead. A car traveling in the same direction, slower than Malik. He was overtaking it. Malik flashed his lights, honked his horn, trying to warn them. The car didn't react. As Malik's truck pulled alongside, he looked into the car and saw a family, mother driving, father in passenger seat, 2 kids in back. They were staring straight ahead, motionless, and through the car's windows Malik could see frost patterns forming on the inside of the glass. They were already frozen. The car was still moving, still maintaining its lane, but the people inside were ice sculptures, dead and preserved, the vehicle operating on momentum or autopilot or something worse. Malik accelerated, pulling ahead of the frozen car. In his mirror, he watched the pursuing frost wave reach the vehicle and consume it entirely. The car transformed into a crystal sculpture, still moving for a few seconds before the wheels locked and it veered into the ditch, shattering into 1,000 pieces on impact. Malik heard the crash even over his engine noise, a sound like a chandelier exploding. The frost was close now, 30 feet back, maybe less. It was gaining. Malik pushed his speed to 75, 80, but the frost matched him, and now he understood. It wasn't maintaining distance, it was slowly catching up, inch by inch, mile by mile. Eventually it would reach his trailer, then his cab, then him. He would become another frozen statue, his truck rolling on until the frost claimed it completely. Why was it following him? What had he done? He'd just stopped at an abandoned gas station. He'd been on the property for maybe 90 seconds. He'd touched nothing, disturbed nothing. But something about stopping there had marked him, had triggered this pursuing wave of impossible winter. Maybe other people had stopped there too. Maybe they were all being chased now, scattered across different highways, running from frost that would eventually catch them. Malik's exterior thermometer read -43 degrees. That was cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Cold enough that his engine should be struggling, fuel gelling, oil thickening. But his truck was running normally. Internally, everything was warm and functional. The cold existed only in a bubble around his vehicle, traveling with him, trying to claim him. The Minneapolis exits were still 60 miles away. 60 miles at 80 miles per hour meant 45 minutes. Could he stay ahead of the frost for 45 minutes? Could he maintain this speed on winter roads without crashing? Malik's hands ached from gripping the wheel. His eyes burned from staring at the mirrors. The white line of frost behind him glowed in his taillights like a living thing, hungry and patient. At mile marker 251, his trailer's refrigeration unit failed. The sudden silence was shocking. The background hum he'd stopped noticing was gone. His cargo temperature alarm started screaming, temperature rising -10 to -5 to 0. The frozen pizzas and vegetables were thawing. His entire load was ruining. But Malik didn't care about the cargo. He cared about the fact that the frost behind him had just accelerated. It surged forward, closing the gap from 30 feet to 20 feet in seconds. Malik slammed the accelerator, pushing 85, 90 miles per hour. The frost matched him, holding at 20 feet. It had been feeding on his refrigeration unit somehow, drawing power from his mechanical cold. And now that the unit was dead, the frost was stronger, faster, more aggressive. Malik's fuel gauge was dropping too fast. He'd had 3/4 of a tank at the gas station. Now he was showing a quarter. The frost was draining his diesel, or he was burning through it at this speed, or his gauge was malfunctioning. Whatever the reason, he was running out of fuel. When the tank emptied, his truck would coast to a stop, and the frost would claim him. He took the next exit, mile marker 267, some small town he'd never heard of. Maybe population could stop the frost, maybe warmth from buildings and people would disrupt it. The exit ramp curved right, leading to a 2-lane road. Malik took it at 70 miles per hour, trailer swaying dangerously. The frost followed down the ramp, consuming the asphalt, spreading into the farmland on either side. The town appeared. Maybe 3,000 people, Main Street with a stoplight, houses dark at midnight, a gas station. A real one operating with lights on. Malik aimed for it. If he could refuel, he could keep running. The frost was 15 feet back now, close enough that he could see individual ice crystals forming, intricate fractals spreading across his trailer doors, beginning the process of claiming his rig. He skidded into the gas station lot, slammed the brakes, jumped out before his truck fully stopped. The diesel pump was on the far side. He'd have to run for it, and the frost was seconds behind, spreading across the lot. Malik ran, slipping on ice he just generated, reaching the pump, grabbing the nozzle. His credit card reader wouldn't work, screen frozen solid. He tried to prepay inside, but the convenience store door was locked, lights on but nobody visible inside. The frost reached his truck, consumed his trailer. The metal groaned, contracting in the sudden supercold, rivets popping like gunshots. Malik backed away from the pump, watching his rig transform into an ice sculpture. The frost spread past his truck, reaching toward him, toward the building, toward the houses beyond. It wasn't stopping. It was going to consume this entire town because he'd let it here. Malik ran again out of the parking lot down the street, away from the spreading frost. Behind him, buildings froze, streetlights shattered, houses coated in white death. He could hear the sounds now, glass breaking, metal contracting, wood splitting. And beneath it all, a sound like breathing, massive inhalations as the frost expanded, consuming heat and life and movement, transforming everything into crystal stillness. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in the middle of a road at the edge of town. The frost was still coming, slower now without his truck to follow, but still advancing. Malik understood. It would never stop. He'd triggered something at that abandoned gas station, some trap or curse or phenomenon, and now he was marked. The frost would follow him until it claimed him or until he found a way to transfer the mark to someone else. Transfer it, that thought crystallized in his oxygen-starved brain. The family in the car, they'd been frozen because they'd been near him, caught in the frost's radius. But what if you could make someone else the primary target? What if you could mark someone else? Malik pulled out his phone, called his brother in Minneapolis. "Leon, I need you to meet me right now. It's an emergency." His brother's sleepy voice. "Malik, it's midnight. What? Please, Leon, I'm in I don't even know what town. I'll send you my location. Please come get me. I need help." Leon agreed reluctantly. Malik sent his GPS coordinates and sat shivering on the road, watching the frost advance down the street. His brother would drive from Minneapolis, 60 miles, maybe an hour. The frost was moving slowly without Malik running, maybe 5 miles per hour walking pace. It might take hours to reach him here. Leon would arrive first. And then, what? Would Malik transfer the mark to his own brother? Could he do that? He had to. Survival instinct overrode morality. Malik sat in the cold January night, watching the town behind him turn to ice, waiting for his brother to arrive, planning how to make Leon the new target. Maybe a touch, maybe proximity, maybe just being nearest when Malik said the words. "I stopped at the gas station on I-29, mile marker 184. Maybe speaking the location aloud to someone else transferred the curse. Headlights appeared, Leon's car approaching fast. He pulled up next to Malik, rolled down his window. "Jesus, Malik, what happened? Where's your truck? Are you hurt?" Malik walked to the passenger door. He could see the frost in the distance, a white line extending down the street. Maybe 10 minutes away. He had 10 minutes to make a decision. "Leon, I need to tell you something." The words stuck in his throat. This was his brother, the man who'd helped him get his CDL, who'd lent him money when he was starting out, who'd been his best man at his wedding. Could Malik really condemn him? "Tell me in the car, man, you're freezing." Leon unlocked the doors. Malik climbed in. Warmth enveloped him, car heater on full blast. Leon started driving, heading back toward Minneapolis. "So what happened? Why were you just sitting in the middle of the road?" Malik opened his mouth to transfer the curse, to speak the location aloud, to make Leon stop at the gas station on some future trip. The words wouldn't come. He sat silent while Leon drove, while the town disappeared behind them, while the frost, maybe, continued following Malik, or maybe had stopped, having lost its target. Malik didn't look back. He couldn't bear to know. But 3 days later, Leon called him. "Hey, Malik, weird thing. I drove past that area where I picked you up, and there's frost everywhere, like unnatural frost. The whole town is frozen solid. They're calling it a freak weather event. They evacuated everybody. What the hell happened that night?" Malik said nothing. The frost hadn't stopped. It had just paused, waiting for Malik to return, waiting to resume its pursuit. He would never drive that route again, never go near North Dakota, never stop at abandoned gas stations. But he knew, with the certainty of nightmares, that distance didn't matter. The frost had marked him. It was patient. It would find him eventually, maybe in days, maybe in years. And when it did, it would finish what it started, transforming Malik Washington into crystal and memory, and one more cautionary tale that truckers told each other on long winter nights when the temperature dropped, and the highway frost looked just a little too alive. Story 6, the VOICES in the white noise. The CB radio static resolved into Sarah Brennan's dead mother's voice at 2:33 a.m., and her mother had been dead for 9 years, since 2015, so hearing her say, "Sarah, honey, you need to pull over right now," was enough to make Sarah nearly drive her Mac Anthem straight into the guardrail of Oregon's Highway 97. She corrected, heart hammering, and turned the CB radio off. The voice continued anyway. "You can't turn me off, sweetheart. We're in the white noise now. We've always been in the white noise." Sarah had been hauling lumber from Bend to Klamath Falls. Night run through the Cascades, March 3rd, 2024. 42,000 pounds of milled timber. Standard cargo, nothing unusual. The highway was empty, just her headlights and the darkness and the endless pine trees that made Oregon feel like the edge of civilization, even when you were only an hour from major cities. She'd been listening to the CB on scan mode, monitoring all channels, hearing nothing but occasional trucker chatter and the underlying static that was always there. The white noise background of CB communication. Except the white noise had changed. Sarah noticed it around mile marker 187, subtle at first. The static had developed rhythm patterns that sounded almost like speech if you listened hard enough. She'd changed channels. Every channel had the same rhythmic static. She turned the volume down. The static grew louder, overriding her volume control. And then it had resolved into words, into her mother's voice, impossible and undeniable. "It's Ra turned the CB dial to channel 19, the trucker channel. Usually active, always someone talking. She keyed the mic. Breaker, breaker, anyone on 19, this is southbound 97, anyone hearing me? Her mother's voice responded. They can't hear you, honey. You're too deep in the white noise. It's just us now. You're not real. You're not my mother. My mother died of cancer 9 years ago. I was at her bedside. This is some kind of... Sarah's voice cracked. This is exhaustion or stress or... I've been trying to reach you for 9 years, her mother's voice interrupted. The white noise is where we go, some of us. The ones who die with messages undelivered. We're caught in the static between stations, between frequencies, and we can only be heard by people who are tuned exactly right. You're tuned right tonight, Sarah. You're finally listening. Sarah's hands trembled on the wheel. Her mother's voice was perfect, the slight rasp from years of smoking, the way she pronounced Sarah as Surah instead of Sarah, the particular cadence that was unique to her. Either Sarah was experiencing the most detailed auditory hallucination possible, or something impossible was happening. "What message?" Sarah whispered. "What did you need to tell me?" "Don't marry Derek," her mother said. "I know you're engaged. I know the wedding is in 4 months. Don't do it. He's going to hurt you, Sarah, not physically, but he's going to take 8 years of your life and leave you with nothing. I saw it coming before I died. I tried to warn you. You didn't listen. Now I'm reaching you the only way I can." Sarah's foot eased off the accelerator. Her truck slowed from 65 to 55. Derek, she started dating him 2 years after her mother died. They'd gotten engaged last December. The wedding was scheduled for July. How could her mother know about Derek? "This is my subconscious," Sarah said, more to herself than to the voice. "I have doubts about Derek, and my brain is manifesting them as my mother's voice because I miss her and... Exit 209 is coming up in 6 miles, her mother's voice said. "Take it. There's something you need to see about Derek, about what he's doing right now while you're on the road. Take the exit, Sarah." "I can't. I have a delivery schedule. I'm already behind because of the weather delay in Bend." But Sarah was curious now, despite herself. Exit 209 led to a small town called Kemmelt. Population maybe 300. Nothing there except a couple of gas stations and some vacation cabins. Why would she need to exit there? "Derek is in one of those cabins," her mother's voice said, reading her thoughts or just predicting them. "Cabin 7 at the Willow Creek Lodge. He told you he was working late tonight, didn't he? Working on that Portland project. He's in Kemmelt with someone else. Take the exit. See for yourself. Then you'll know I'm not just your subconscious." Sarah's GPS showed exit 209 3 miles ahead. Derek had indeed said he was working late on the Portland project, a construction job that required evening supervision. But Portland was north. Kemmelt was south, middle of nowhere, 3 hours from their home in Eugene. There was no reason Derek would be here. Unless... Sarah took the exit. She told herself she was just proving the voice wrong, proving this was hallucination or stress or some weird psychological break. She'd drive through Kemmelt, see that Derek's car wasn't there, and continue on to Klamath Falls with her sanity intact. The exit ramp curved right, leading to a 2-lane road through dense forest. Her CB radio continued hissing static, her mother's voice gone for the moment. Kemmelt appeared, A few streetlights, a gas station, a motel, and signs for the Willow Creek Lodge pointing left. Sarah followed the signs, her truck rumbling through the tiny town. She shouldn't be doing this. She should be on the highway making her delivery. But her hands turned the wheel anyway, following the signs, and 5 minutes later she pulled into the Willow Creek Lodge parking lot. Cabin 7 was third from the left, and parked in front of it was Derek's truck, unmistakable, the blue Ford F-250 with the construction company logo on the side. Sarah's stomach dropped into her boots. She sat staring at the truck, trying to process what this meant. Derek was here, in Kemmelt, in a cabin, at 3:00 a.m., while he'd told her he was working late in Portland. The CB radio crackled. Her mother's voice. "I'm sorry, honey. I wish I was wrong, but you needed to know before you married him, before you wasted your life." Sarah climbed out of her truck, walked across the parking lot, stood outside cabin 7. Lights were off inside. She could knock, confront him, but what if there was an innocent explanation? What if he was here for legitimate work reasons and had just failed to mention it? She pulled out her phone, called Derek. It rang 6 times, went to voicemail. She called again. Same result. She tried the car. Bin door unlocked. She pushed it open quietly. Inside, illuminated by moonlight through the windows, she saw Derek in bed with someone else. Not even asleep, they were awake, talking quietly, intimate. Sarah recognized the woman, Jenna, Derek's co-worker, the one he'd always said was just a friend. Sarah backed out of the cabin, closed the door silently, walked back to her truck. She felt hollow, emptied out. 9 years after her mother's death, her mother had reached through the white noise of a CB radio to warn her. And the warning was accurate, exactly accurate. She climbed back in her truck, sat in the driver's seat, and keyed the CB mic. "Mom, are you still there?" "I'm here," her mother's voice came through the static. "I'm always here, in the white noise, waiting to help when you're tuned right." "How is this possible?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "How can you know things? How can you see what's happening?" "The white noise is everywhere, honey. Every radio frequency, every untuned channel, every space between signals. We're in all of it simultaneously. We can see through any receiver, hear through any speaker. We're diffused across the electromagnetic spectrum. Death didn't end us. It scattered us into the noise. Some of us figured out how to coalesce back into consciousness, to speak, to warn the people we left behind." Sarah started her engine, pulled out of the parking lot, headed back toward Highway 97. She needed to think, needed to process, needed to figure out what this meant for her understanding of reality. "Are there others?" she asked. "In the white noise, other dead people?" "Thousands," her mother said. "Maybe millions. Everyone who died with unfinished business, everyone who couldn't let go, everyone who loved someone enough to cling to existence even in this scattered form. We're all here trying to reach through, trying to warn or comfort or say goodbye. Most people never hear us. The white noise is just noise to them. But sometimes someone tunes their radio exactly right, or they're emotionally open enough, or they're in the right location where the veil is thin and we can get through." Sarah merged back onto Highway 97, continuing south. Her delivery schedule was shot. She'd have to explain the delay somehow, but right now she didn't care about lumber or schedules. "Can I talk to you again?" she asked. "After tonight, can I tune my radio and find you?" "I'll always be here," her mother said. "Channel 19 usually, that's where the most traffic is, the most voices, the easiest place to hide my signal in the noise. But Sarah," her mother's voice took on a warning tone. "Be careful. Not everyone in the white noise is benign. Some of the dead are angry. Some are predatory. Some died badly and want to make the living feel their pain. If you start listening to the white noise regularly, you'll hear them too. They'll try to reach you. They'll pretend to be people you trust. Don't believe every voice you hear." A chill ran down Sarah's back. "How do I know you're really my mother? How do I know you're not one of those predatory things?" Silence, long enough that Sarah thought the connection was lost. Then, "Your 8th birthday, you wanted a bike. We couldn't afford one. I saw you crying in your room, trying to hide it from me. I worked 3 extra shifts at the diner, bought you a used bike from the pawn shop, painted it pink myself. You named it Rosie. You rode it until you were 14, even after you'd outgrown it, because you knew how hard I'd worked to get it for you. That's how you know I'm real, Sarah. Because I remember the moments that mattered." Tears blurred Sarah's vision. She wiped them away, focused on the road. "I remember Rosie," she whispered. "I still have her in my garage. I couldn't get rid of her." "I know, honey. I watch over you when I can, when you're near radios or speakers or anything that receives signals. I see fragments of your life through the white noise. I'm proud of you. I'm proud you became a trucker. You're living free, just like you always wanted." They talked for another hour while Sarah drove. Her mother told her things, warnings about upcoming road conditions, advice about her career, suggestions for handling the Derek situation. Some of it was practical information her mother couldn't possibly know. Some of it was emotional support Sarah desperately needed. And all of it came through the CB radio static, her mother's voice weaving in and out of the white noise like a signal trying to stay coherent against interference. At mile marker 288, her mother's voice began to fade. "I'm losing the connection, Sarah. You're moving out of range, or the conditions are changing, or I'm running out of strength. It takes energy to coalesce like this. But I'll be here, in the white noise, whenever you need me. Just tune your radio and listen for me between the stations." "Mom, wait," Sarah's voice cracked. "I love you. I never got to say it at the END. You were unconscious, and I never said." "I know, honey. I heard you thinking it. The white noise can hear thoughts too sometimes if they're strong enough. I love you too. I never stopped. Death doesn't end love. It just scatters it into static. But it's still there, always." The voice faded into pure white noise. Sarah tried adjusting the dial, scanning through channels, but found only normal CB traffic and empty static. Her mother was gone, dissolved back into the electromagnetic spectrum, waiting for the next moment when conditions aligned for contact. Sarah drove the rest of the route in silence. She made her delivery at 6:47 a.m., 3 hours late. Her dispatcher was angry. She didn't care. She drove home to Eugene, arrived at noon, walked into her house where Derek was sleeping. He'd come home sometime that morning, apparently acting as if nothing had happened. Sarah packed a bag, left a note ending the engagement, and moved in with her sister. That night, alone in her sister's guest room, Sarah turned on a portable radio, tuned it to the space between stations, and in the white noise, very faintly, she heard voices, Dozens of them, hundreds, all overlapping, all trying to speak, all scattered consciousness clinging to existence through radio waves and electromagnetic fields. Most were incomprehensible, but occasionally she'd hear words, "Help me. Tell my son, I'm still here. Listen, please listen. Don't forget me." Sarah began listening every night, tuning her radio to the white noise, trying to help the dead reach their living loved ones. She'd call strangers, people whose names she heard in the static, and deliver messages. Most thought she was crazy. Some listened. A few confirmed that the messages were accurate, contained information only the dead person would know. Sarah became a medium of sorts, a translator between the white noise and the living world. But the voices started following her, not just in radios, in televisions, phones, computers, any device that received signals. The dead were everywhere in the modern world, scattered across every frequency, every channel, every wavelength. And now that Sarah could hear them, they wouldn't leave her alone. They whispered from her truck's radio while she drove. They called to her from highway emergency call boxes. They left messages on her voicemail in the voices of people she'd never met. The worst were the angry ones, the predatory dead her mother had warned about. They de-imitate her mother's voice, luring her into conversations before revealing their true nature. Malevolent entities that fed on attention, on fear, on the energy living people gave them by listening. Sarah learned to recognize them. They'd know things her mother wouldn't. They'd make demands instead of offering help. They'd try to isolate her from other living people. One night, 6 months after first hearing her mother in the white noise, Sarah was driving through Montana when every device in her truck activated simultaneously. CB radio, phone, GPS, satellite radio, even her Bluetooth speaker. All of them speaking in unison with a voice that was definitely not her mother. "We know you can hear us, Sarah. We know you're listening. We want out. We want bodies. We want life again. Let us in. Open yourself to us. Let us possess you, and we'll give you power, knowledge, everything you ever wanted." Sarah had pulled over, ripped every electronic device out of her truck, thrown them into the ditch, driven the rest of the route in electronic silence. But even without devices, she could still hear the whispers, very faint, coming from power lines overhead, from cell towers in the distance, from the radio waves that saturated every inch of modern existence. She'd become permanently tuned to the white noise. There was no turning it off. She tried to warn other truckers, posted on forums, talked on the CB when she dared use it. "Don't listen too closely to the static," she'd say. "Don't tune between stations. Don't try to hear voices in the white noise. Once you start hearing them, you can't stop." Most ignored her. A few listened. Sarah didn't know if she was helping or just spreading paranoia. Her mother's voice came through sometimes, still offering guidance, still trying to help. But Sarah could never be sure if it was really her mother or one of the predatory things imitating her. The white noise was full of deceit, of dead things that had learned to manipulate the living by sounding like their loved ones. Trust was impossible. Every voice was suspect. Sarah kept driving, kept delivering cargo, kept existing in a world where the dead spoke constantly from every electromagnetic frequency, where the space between radio stations contained more consciousness than the living world, where the white noise was an ocean of scattered souls all crying out for attention, for help, for remembrance. She, Dee, learned to tune most of it out, to function despite the constant whispers. But she knew She'd never be free of it. She de-opened her ears to the white noise, and the white noise would never let her go. She wondered sometimes how many other people heard it, the voices in the static, the dead speaking from radio waves. How many people were walking around hearing whispers from devices, getting messages from dead loved ones, being contacted by things that pretended to be human but were something else. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe there were thousands of people tuned to the white noise, all quietly going insane, all trying to help the dead or flee from them, or simply survive the constant bombardment of voices from the electromagnetic spectrum. Sarah drove through the night, CB radio on, listening to her mother and the thousands of others trying to separate truth from deception, love from malevolence, memory from predation. The white noise never stopped. The voices never ended. And somewhere in the static, Sarah Brennan's sanity was slowly scattering too, diffusing across frequencies, until eventually she wouldn't be able to tell the difference between her own thoughts and the whispers of the dead, between her living voice and the voice she'd become when she finally joined them in the white noise forever. Story 7. The Road That Loops Infinitely. Jacob Morrison realized he'd passed the same dead deer for the 5th time at 4:16 a.m., and that was when panic truly set in. The deer was distinctive, lying on the shoulder of Kentucky's Route 80, illuminated by his headlights, front leg twisted at an unnatural angle, frost covering its brown fur. He'd noticed it the first time because of the leg. The second time he'd thought maybe he'd misremembered which side of the road it was on. The third time he'd checked his GPS. The fourth time he'd stopped and spray-painted an orange X on the pavement next to the carcass. Now, the fifth time, the orange X was there, fresh and bright, and Jacob understood he was trapped in a loop. He'd been hauling electronics from Louisville to Lexington, laptops and monitors, 41,000 pounds of fragile cargo that required careful handling. February 26, 2024, clear night, good roads, everything routine until he'd entered the stretch of Route 80 between mile markers 54 and 61. 7 miles of two-lane highway through the Daniel Boone National Forest. 7 miles that Jacob had now driven at least 5 times without progressing forward or backward. 7 miles that had become his entire universe. Jacob stopped his Freightliner at marker 57, put it in park, and tried to think rationally. Loop in space. Repeating section of highway. He'd heard of phenomena like this in ghost stories, urban legends, but this was real. The same deer, the same trees, the same road signs, the same potholes, perfect repetition. His odometer said he'd driven 38 miles in the past hour. Route 80 said he'd driven 7 miles 5 times. His GPS was useless. Showed his position correctly according to mile markers, but the destination distance never changed. Always 49 miles to Lexington. No matter how many loops he completed, Lexington remained exactly 49 miles away. His phone showed signal strength but couldn't connect calls. Text messages wouldn't send. Data wouldn't load. He was isolated in this 7-mile loop with no way to communicate with the outside world. Jacob restarted his drive, slower this time, watching carefully for any sign of exit from the loop. Marker 54 appeared, the start of the section. He noted the time, 4:23 a.m., drove at exactly 40 miles per hour, watching his odometer. At 4:33 a.m., marker 61 should appear, 7 miles at 40 miles per hour, 10 minutes and 30 seconds. The math was precise. Marker 61 appeared at 4:33 a.m. exactly. Jacob felt a surge of hope. Maybe he'd broken the loop. He continued forward, watching for marker 62. Instead, marker 54 appeared. The dead deer lay on the shoulder, orange X beside it. Loop 6. He'd entered the loop by crossing marker 61, and exiting marker 61 just brought him back to marker 54. The road was folded somehow, both ends connected, forming an impossible Möbius strip of highway. Could he reverse out? Jacob stopped, shifted into reverse, and backed up. Marker 60 appeared behind him, then 59, then 58, normal progression moving backward through the loop. His hope grew. He backed all the way to marker 54, still in reverse. Marker 53 should appear next. Instead, marker 61 appeared behind him. The loop worked both directions. Forward or backward, he couldn't escape. Jacob got out of his truck, stood on the highway, and screamed. His voice echoed through the forest, came back to him distorted. He walked to the tree line, tried to push through the undergrowth. The trees were too dense, branches interlocking, forming an impenetrable wall. He walked along the tree line for 100 yards. The wall never broke, never thinned. The forest was solid, refusing entry. He returned to his truck, grabbed a tire iron, and approached one of the mile marker signs, marker 57. He swung the iron, hit the sign's post. The impact vibrated up his arms, but the post didn't dent or bend. He hit it again, harder. The tire iron bounced off like he'd struck solid steel. The mile marker was indestructible. Maybe everything in the loop was indestructible, frozen in permanent state, repeating forever. Jacob climbed back in his truck and drove again. Loop 7, Loop 8, Loop 9. He started counting the loops, scratching marks into his dashboard with a key. He tried varying his speed, sometimes 60 miles per hour, sometimes 20. The loop always reset exactly at marker 61. He tried stopping at different points within the loop. Didn't matter. Time kept passing, but space stayed constant. At loop 16, another vehicle appeared, a car traveling in the opposite direction. Jacob flashed his lights, honked his horn. The car passed without slowing. He glimpsed the driver, a woman middle-aged, staring straight ahead with no expression. He spun his truck around, tried to follow the car, but by the time he completed the turn, the car had disappeared. He never saw it again. At loop 23, Jacob noticed the dead deer had moved. Not much, maybe 3 inches to the left. He stopped, examined it closely. The frost on its fur was thicker. The body was degrading very slowly, advancing through decomposition 1 millimeter per loop. Time was passing for the deer, but not for anything else. Or maybe everything in the loop was experiencing time differently, each object moving through its own temporal rate. Jacob checked his phone, battery at 68%. It had been at 94% when he entered the loop. Time was passing for his electronics. He checked his truck's fuel gauge, 3/4 full, down from full when he'd entered. Time was passing for him and his truck, but not for the world outside. He was consuming resources, fuel, battery, food, water, while trapped in a space that never changed. How long could he survive? His truck's fuel would last maybe 8 more hours at this driving pace. Then what Would he be stuck here forever, unable to drive, unable to leave, slowly starving in a loop of highway that repeated eternally? Jacob's breathing accelerated, panic attack building. He forced himself to calm down, to think practically. Someone would notice he was missing. His dispatcher would call. Police would search. They'd find his last known location, trace his route, discover him trapped in this loop. But would they? If he couldn't exit, could anyone else enter? Maybe the loop was isolated, invisible from outside. Maybe right now, other trucks were driving through this section of Route 80, experiencing it normally as 7 miles of highway, completely unaware that Jacob was trapped in a parallel version, repeating the same 7 miles infinitely. At Loop 37, Jacob's theory was confirmed. He saw another truck approaching from ahead, a semi just like his hauling a container. Jacob stopped in the middle of the road, blocking both lanes. The approaching truck should have to stop or swerve. Instead, it drove through him. Jacob felt a moment of cold, a sensation like passing through a waterfall, and then the truck was gone, continuing down the road as if Jacob didn't exist. He was in a parallel loop, occupying the same space as the real highway but unable to interact with it. He was a ghost on his own road. Jacob screamed again, this time from pure despair. He was invisible, intangible, trapped in a pocket dimension that overlaid Route 80 but was separate from reality. No one would find him. No one would help. He would drive these 7 miles until his fuel ran out, and then he'd sit here until he died of thirst or hunger, and his body would remain in this loop forever, decomposing at whatever strange temporal rate the loop dictated, maybe eventually becoming another landmark like the dead deer. Jacob Morrison's corpse, shoulder of the road, marker 57, orange X on his forehead. At Loop 41, Jacob started seeing people in the trees. They stood among the branches, motionless, watching him drive past. He counted 17 of them, all wearing the same expression, blank acceptance. All dressed in clothes from different eras, some modern, some decades old. Jacob realized they were other people who'd been trapped in the loop, who'd abandoned their vehicles, who'd walked into the forest and found they couldn't leave and had just stopped. Stopped moving, stopped trying, stopped existing as anything except statues of flesh, standing forever in the woods. Jacob would not become one of them. He kept driving. Loop 45, Loop 50. His fuel gauge was at 1/4. His phone battery was at 31%. He was thirsty, hadn't drunk anything since entering the loop hours ago. He had a gallon of water in his sleeper berth. No sleeper berth in his truck, but suddenly there was a sleeper berth, a PIA. Ring when he needed it, as if the loop was providing resources to keep him alive and driving. Jacob didn't question it. He drank, relieved himself in a bottle, and kept driving. Loop 63. The dead deer was gone. The orange X remained on the pavement, but the deer had decomposed completely or been removed by whatever invisible forces maintained the loop. In its place was a new landmark, a backpack sitting on the shoulder at marker 59. Jacob stopped, examined it. Inside, a wallet with an ID card, James Chen, born 1987, address in Lexington. Jacob searched his memory. James Chen, had he heard that name? On the news maybe? Missing person. Jacob took the backpack with him, drove 3 more loops. The backpack disappeared from his passenger seat, And at loop 67, when he passed marker 59, the backpack was back on the shoulder exactly where he'd found it. The loop was resetting objects, returning them to their designated positions. But it had taken 3 loops to do so. Maybe that was the rule: remove something from its position, and after 3 loops it would reset. Jacob wondered if the same rule applied to him. If he stopped his truck and walked away, would he reset after 3 loops? Would he reappear at the point where he'd first entered? He tested it at loop 70. He parked at marker 57, got out, walked down the highway to marker 58. Then he waited. Time passed. He checked his watch, 6:14 a.m. He'd been in the loop for nearly 2 hours. Dawn should be breaking, but the sky remained perfectly dark, stars frozen in place. Day would never come here. The loop existed in permanent night. An hour passed by his watch. No reset. He was still at marker 58, still standing on the highway, still trapped. So the 3-loop rule didn't apply to living things. Or maybe it only applied to objects belonging to people who'd already given up, who'd joined the statues in the forest. Jacob returned to his truck, resumed driving. Loop 81. His fuel gauge was at 1/8. Jacob made a decision. He would drive until the fuel ran out, and then he would walk to the edge of the loop, marker 54 or marker 61, and he would wait at the exact boundary point. Maybe the reset only happened when you crossed the boundary while moving. Maybe if you stood exactly at the transition point, you'd be on the edge of both the loop and reality, and someone from reality could see you or touch you or pull you out. It was a desperate plan. Probably wouldn't work. But Jacob was running out of options, and sitting still meant dying, and dying meant joining the statues in the forest, and he refused that fate. He would fight until the end, would try every possible escape attempt, would rage against the loop even if rage was futile. Loop 93. His fuel ran out. The engine coughed, sputtered, died. Jacob coasted to a stop at marker 59, 2 miles from either boundary. He got out, started walking toward marker 61. His legs ached. He was exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear. The highway stretched ahead, illuminated by starlight that never faded. He walked for what felt like hours. Marker 60 appeared, then marker 61. Then marker 54. He decrossed the boundary. And nothing changed. He was still in the loop, now on foot instead of in his truck. He turned around, walked back toward marker 61, crossed it again. Marker 54 became marker 61, became marker 54 in endless cycle. The loop wasn't just spatial, it was personal. Once you entered, you were part of it forever, walking or driving or standing still, always within those 7 miles. Never escaping, never dying, never truly living, just existing in the permanent night of Route 80's impossible geometry. Jacob collapsed at marker 57. He de-walked maybe 6 complete loops, had covered 42 miles on foot, and was exactly where he'd started. His body couldn't continue. He lay on the cold asphalt, staring up at the frozen stars, and wondered how long he'd last. Days maybe without water. Longer with the sleeper berth that had appeared in his truck. Could he walk back to his truck? Was it still at marker 59, or had it reset to wherever it was supposed to be? He closed his eyes, tried to sleep. Couldn't. The loop wouldn't let him sleep. Every time he approached unconsciousness, he'd jolt awake, heart racing, as if the loop needed him conscious to witness it. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the loop was a trap specifically for witnesses, for people who had to watch and experience and know they were trapped. Maybe unconsciousness was an escape the loop couldn't allow. Jacob heard footsteps, opened his eyes. A figure was walking toward him down the highway, one of the statues from the forest, moving now, approaching with slow, deliberate steps. As it got closer, Jacob saw it was a man, maybe 60 years old, wearing clothes from the 1980s. The man stopped beside Jacob, looked down with those blank, accepting eyes. "You're new," the man said. His voice was distant, echoing. "I was new once in 989. I've been walking these 7 miles for 35 years. You stop counting loops eventually. You stop counting days. You just walk and accept and become part of the loop. It's easier if you stop fighting." "I won't stop fighting," Jacob gasped. "There has to be a way out." "There isn't," the man said. "This is the trap. This is where Route 80 caught a fold in space back in 1952, and it's been catching people ever since. 72 years of loops, hundreds of people trapped. We're all still here, all walking, all existing in slightly different temporal phases, so we rarely see each other. But we're here, forever. Join us in the forest when you're ready. Standing still is better than walking endlessly." The man walked away, disappearing into the trees. Jacob tried to call after him, but had no voice left. He lay on the highway, staring at the frozen stars, and felt the loop pull him to his feet. His body moved without conscious command, walking forward, continuing the loop because the loop demanded continuation. Marker 58 appeared, then 59, then 60, then 61, then 54. Jacob walked, loop 94, loop 100, loop 117. His sense of time dissolved. His identity began fragmenting. He was Jacob Morrison. He was the loop. He was the highway, the markers, the dead deer that had decomposed and reset. He was walking, and he had always been walking, and he would always be walking through these 7 miles of Kentucky's Route 80, trapped in the fold, caught in the trap, becoming a statue, becoming a ghost, becoming another landmark for whoever entered the loop next. Somewhere in the distance, he heard an engine, another truck entering the loop, another driver about to discover they were trapped. Jacob tried to warn them, tried to scream, but his voice was gone, his identity was gone, his humanity was scattering across the infinite repetitions of 7 miles that never ended, never changed, never released their prisoners. He walked into the forest, found a space between the trees, and stopped moving. Let the blank acceptance fill him. Became another statue, another witness, another permanent fixture of the loop that would stand here forever, watching new victims enter, watching them realize, watching them fight and fail and eventually join the forest, until Route 80 held more statues than trees, more trapped souls than living travelers, more horror than any 7 miles of highway should ever contain. Story 8, The Fog That Reveals. The fog rolled onto Interstate 5 at exactly midnight, and within its white depths, Christina Valdez could see her future corpse standing on the shoulder, waving at her to stop. The corpse was her, same face, same leather jacket, same wedding ring, but dead for what looked like several days, skin gray and slack, eyes clouded, mouth hanging open. As Christina's truck approached, the corpse pointed frantically at Christina's trailer, then vanished as the rig passed through the fog bank where it had stood. Christina had been hauling produce from Bakersfield to Seattle, lettuce and strawberries, 39,000 pounds of refrigerated cargo that needed to maintain exactly 34 degrees. January 14th, 2024, standard overnight run up the I-5 corridor. She'd driven this route probably 300 times in her 12 years behind the wheel. She'd never seen fog that looked like this, too white, too thick, too localized. And she'd definitely never seen her own corpse. She slowed her Kenworth from 70 to 50 miles per hour, peering into the fog. It lay across the highway in distinct patches, clear road, then sudden wall of white, then clear road again. Driving through it felt like passing through curtains, each one revealing something in the moment before she emerged on the other side. In the first fog patch, she'd seen her corpse. In the second patch, she saw her truck on its side, jackknifed across the southbound lanes, trailer burst open, produce scattered across the asphalt. Christina's hands tightened on the wheel. These weren't hallucinations. The images were too specific, too detailed. Her corpse had been wearing the jacket she was wearing right now. The jackknifed truck had her company logo, her truck number, her license plate. She was seeing her future, her death apparently sometime soon, somewhere on this highway. The third fog patch showed her trailer doors hanging open, cargo missing, refrigeration unit destroyed. The fourth patch showed police lights, ambulances, a covered body on a gurney. The fifth patch showed her husband Carlos at a funeral, head bowed, shoulders shaking. Christina's breath came in gasps. The fog was showing her death in sequence. The crash, the aftermath, the funeral. But why was this a warning? Could she prevent what she was seeing? She grabbed her CB radio. Anyone else on I-5 northbound seeing this fog? Anyone seeing images in it? Static answered, but through the static came a voice, not quit. Human, layered and echoing. The fog reveals. The fog shows truth. You are seeing your death, Christina Valdez. It will happen in 47 minutes unless you change course. Who are you? Christina demanded. What is this? The fog is a phenomenon. It appears on certain highways at certain times when conditions align. It shows travelers their futures, specifically the futures where they die on the road. Most people don't believe what they see. They continue driving. They fulfill the visions. You have 47 minutes to make a different choice. Christina checked her GPS. Seattle was still 6 hours away, but there was an exit coming up in 3 miles, exit 268, leading to a small town called Corning. She could exit, stop, wait for the fog to clear. Delay her route, miss her delivery window, but survive. That was the rational choice, the safe choice. But what if the fog was lying? What if this was some elaborate hallucination caused by carbon monoxide or contaminated food or a stroke? What if she exited and nothing bad would have happened, and she ruined her delivery schedule for nothing? Christina had perfect safety record, 12 years without incident. She'd be damned if some weird fog was going to break her streak. She continued driving. The fog patches became more frequent, closer together. Each one showed a different angle of her death, her truck leaving the road, hitting the center divider, trailer whipping around, cab rolling, her body thrown through the windshield. The images were nauseating in their detail. She could see her arm bent backward, bones protruding. Could see blood pooling under her head. Could see her eyes open and empty, staring at nothing. 43 minutes, the voice on the CB said. Exit 268 is approaching. Take it. Choose life. Christina's foot moved toward the brake. Exit 268's sign appeared in her headlights. She signaled right, started to move toward the exit lane, then stopped. This was insane. She was letting some mysterious fog and a creepy voice control her decisions. She was a professional driver. She didn't spook easily. She merged back into the driving lane, past exit 268, continued north. The fog responded immediately. The patches coalesced, forming a solid wall across the highway. Christina entered it at 50 miles per hour and visibility dropped to 0. She couldn't see her hood, couldn't see the road lines, couldn't see anything except pure white. She hit her hazard lights, slowed to 30 miles per hour, tried to follow where the road should be based on memory and instinct. In the whiteness, shapes appeared. Not visions of her death anymore, something else. People, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing on the highway, standing in the lanes, standing everywhere. As Christina's truck passed through them, they turned to watch her. All of them were dead. She could tell by their eyes, by the wounds visible on their bodies, by the way they moved with that particular stillness that only corpses have. These were people who died on I-5, and the fog was showing them to her. All the accumulated deaths of this highway, all the tragedy compressed into one supernatural exhibition. They want you to join them, the voice said. They're waiting for you 38 minutes. Christina accelerated, pushing through the fog, trying to escape it. The speedometer climbed. 40, 50, 60, 65. Dangerous speed in zero visibility, but she needed out of this fog, needed to escape the dead people and the visions and the voice that kept counting down her remaining life. The fog stretched on, mile after mile, refusing to end. A truck appeared ahead, sudden and close, red taillights materializing from the white. Christina swerved, nearly clipped it, heard her trailer fishtail. She overcorrected, felt the whole rig shimmy, brought it back under control through muscle memory and prayer. That was almost it. That swerve had almost been the crash the fog predicted. 38 minutes had nearly become right now. The fog finally cleared at mile marker 298. Christina emerged into normal night, clear skies, visible road. She was shaking, soaked in sweat. Her heart felt like it was trying to punch through her rib cage. She checked her clock, 12:37 a.m. If the fog's timeline was accurate, she had 11 minutes until the crash that would kill her. 11 minutes to figure out what would cause it and how to prevent it. She pulled onto the shoulder, put her hazard lights on, and got out to inspect her truck. Walked around the whole rig, checking tires, lights, connections. Everything looked normal. Her trailer was secure, refrigeration unit running properly, cargo intact. There was no mechanical reason for a crash, so what would cause it? Another vehicle hitting her? A deer? A sudden medical event, heart attack, aneurysm, something making her lose control. Christina climbed back in her cab and just sat, waiting for the prediction to fail. She would sit here on the should. For the next 11 minutes not moving, making the crash impossible. At 12:44 a.m., she'd start driving again and the fog's prediction would be proven wrong. She watched the clock. 12:40, 12:43, 12:47, nothing happened. The predicted time passed. Christina exhaled deeply, relief flooding her chest. She'd beaten it. The fog had been wrong or she'd changed the timeline by stopping. She started her engine, checked her mirrors, prepared to merge back onto the highway. A California Highway Patrol car pulled up behind her, lights flashing. Christina's stomach sank. She hadn't done anything wrong, but Highway Patrol at 12:48 a.m. never meant anything good. The officer approached her window. Christina rolled it down. "Evening, ma'am. Everything okay here?" "Yes, officer. Just pulled over to check my load. Everything's secure." "A license and registration, please." Christina handed them over. The officer examined them with his flashlight. "Your load includes strawberries from Bakersfield, correct?" "Yes, sir. Strawberries and lettuce, refrigerated." "I need you to open your trailer, ma'am. We've received reports of smuggling operations using produce shipments. Random inspection." Christina's blood went cold. Smuggling? Her company was legitimate. Her cargo was inspected at loading. She had all her paperwork. But the officer's face was wrong, too smooth, too expressionless, eyes that didn't quite focus correctly. And his uniform was slightly wrong, too, patches in the wrong places, badge number that didn't follow proper format. "Sir, I have my manifests I can show you." "Open the trailer, ma'am, now." Christina climbed out, walked to the back of her trailer with the officer following. She unlocked the doors, swung them open. Inside, her produce cargo was visible, pallets of strawberries and lettuce exactly as documented. The officer climbed in, started moving boxes. "We've had reports of contraband hidden beneath legitimate cargo. I need to inspect the entire load." Something was very wrong. This wasn't proper procedure. Random inspections didn't work like this. And the officer was moving boxes too roughly, damaging the produce, which no real highway patrol would do because they'd be liable for the damage. Christina backed away, reached for her phone to call her dispatcher. The officer turned, and his face was different now, not human anymore, something else wearing human skin, something from the fog. "31 minutes have passed," it said in that layered, echoing voice. "You delayed the crash, but you didn't prevent it. I am the crash now. I am what kills you." Christina ran, sprinted toward the front of her truck, hearing the officer thing pursuing. She reached her cab, climbed in, slammed the door, hit the locks. The thing smashed against her window, face pressed to the glass, features distorting, becoming less human with each second. Its hand punched through the window, glass shattering, hand reaching for her throat. Christina started the engine, released the parking brake, accelerated. The thing clung to her door, half in, half out of the cab, trying to force its way inside. She swerved violently, trying to shake it off. The thing held on, fingers digging into her shoulder, pulling itself closer. Christina grabbed her tire iron from beneath her seat, swung it one-handed, connected with the thing's head. It made a sound like wet paper tearing, and pieces of its face came off, revealing something underneath that wasn't flesh, wasn't bone, wasn't anything she could process. She hit it again. It let go, fell away, tumbled across the highway. Christina accelerated, pushing 70, 80, 90 miles per hour. In her mirrors, she saw the thing standing in the road, reforming, becoming the highway patrol officer again. Then it dissolved into fog, and the fog started pursuing her truck, rolling down I-5 at impossible speed, matching her 90 miles per hour, closing the distance. She couldn't outrun it. The fog was faster now, angry now, determined to fulfill its prediction. Christina looked ahead, saw another fog patch appearing on the road. She was about to be sandwiched between two fog banks, trapped with nowhere to go. The fog ahead showed her death again, the crash, the blood, the covered body. This was it. This was the moment. The fog had delayed the timeline but not changed the outcome. A truck stop appeared on the right, exit 312, Dunnigan. Christina took it at 85 miles per hour, nearly rolling her truck on the turn, trailer swinging wide, tires screaming. She roared down the exit ramp, shot into the truck stop parking lot, aimed for the building. If she could get inside a structure, maybe the fog couldn't follow. Maybe buildings were safe. She slammed the brakes, skidded across the lot, stopped inches from the building's wall, jumped out, ran for the entrance. The door was locked, truck stop closed, lights off. Christina pounded on the glass. Behind her, fog was rolling into the parking lot, filling the space between trucks, approaching like a living thing. She grabbed a garbage can, threw it through the door's glass, climbed through, cut her hand on the remaining shards. Inside, she collapsed behind the counter. Her hand bled freely, dripping on the floor. The fog pressed against the windows, testing them, probing for entry. Christina grabbed napkins, wrapped her hand, tried to slow the bleeding. The fog couldn't get in. Buildings were safe. She survived. "You've only delayed," the voice said, coming from every speaker in the building, intercom system, radio behind the counter, her own phone in her pocket. "The fog shows truth. Your death on I-5 is inevitable. Tonight, next week, next month. The highway will claim you eventually. We'll be waiting." The fog retreated, rolling back toward I-5, dissipating into the night. Christina sat in the dark truck stop, bleeding, shaking, knowing the voice was right. She couldn't avoid I-5 forever. She was a trucker. This was her route. And the fog had shown her future death, which meant eventually, despite all precautions, despite all fear, she would die here. She called Carlos, told him everything. He drove to Dunnigan, picked her up, took her to a hospital for her hand. She quit trucking the next day. Told her company she couldn't drive any more, health reasons, personal reasons, any reason except the real one, that she'd seen her death in the fog and couldn't face I-5 again. But 3 months later, on April 14th, Christina was driving with Carlos in their personal car, heading north on I-5 to visit family in Oregon. She wasn't working, wasn't in her truck, was just a passenger in a car driven by someone else. At midnight, the fog appeared. Carlos drove into it, and Christina saw the vision again, her death, but different now. Not a truck crash, a car accident. Different date, same highway, same outcome. The fog had updated its prediction. Christina screamed for Carlos to exit. He did, confused and frightened. They stayed in a motel, waited for dawn. But Christina knew she couldn't run forever. I-5 was the main corridor through California, Oregon, Washington. Avoiding it entirely meant never traveling north-south on the West Coast. Meant isolating herself, restricting her life, living in fear of a fog that had shown her a truth she couldn't change. She drives I-5 now sometimes. Has to. For work at her new job, for family visits, for life. Each time she watches for fog. Each time midnight approaches and she holds her breath, wondering if tonight is the night the prediction comes true. The fog hasn't appeared again, but Christina knows it's waiting. Somewhere on I-5, on some future midnight, The fog will roll in and show her the exact moment of her death one final time. And seconds later, that moment will arrive, and the highway will claim her as it claims everyone eventually, as it has claimed the hundreds of dead people who stand in the fog, waiting for company, waiting for Christina Valdez to join them in the white depths of I-5's most impossible and true phenomenon. Story 9, The Static Children. The children appeared in Malcolm Torr's headlights at 3:51 a.m., 12 of them standing in perfect formation across both lanes of Wyoming's Highway 287, and they were made of television static. Not wearing static, not covered in it, made of it, their bodies composed entirely of black and white visual noise, humanoid shapes of interference and grain. Malcolm slammed his brakes, his Peterbilt shuddering, tires shrieking, cargo of drilling equipment shifting behind him with sounds like thunder. He stopped 18 feet from the children. They didn't move. Malcolm had been driving for 19 years, hauling oil field equipment across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. He'd seen animals on the highway, deer, elk, coyotes, even a moose once. He'd never seen anything like this. The children stood motionless, static bodies flickering and pulsing, shapes approximating humans between ages maybe 5 and 12. Their faces were chaos, white noise and black noise fighting for dominance, but their postures suggested awareness, suggested intent. They were watching him. He honked his horn. The children didn't react, didn't scatter like real children would. Malcolm put his truck in park, activated his hazards, and climbed out. March 8, 2024, temperature 23 degrees, clear night full of stars. His breath formed clouds. The children formed clouds of static interference radiating from their bodies, distorting the air around them. "Hey," Malcolm called. "You kids okay? You lost." His voice sounded wrong, dampened, as if the static was absorbing sound. The nearest child, a girl shape, maybe 10 years old, turned her noise face toward him. Through the static, Malcolm heard a voice, high-pitched and distorted. "Mister, can you help us? We're trying to get home." Malcolm approached cautiously. This was impossible. These weren't children. But they were speaking calm, unicating, asking for help. Maybe they were some kind of hologram, a prank, college kids with projectors. He looked around for equipment for people hiding in the sagebrush. Nothing. Just the empty highway and the 12 static children. "Where's home?" Malcolm asked. "In the signal," a boy shape answered, this one taller, maybe 12. "We got lost when the transmission ended. We've been walking for years, decades. We can't find our way back." Malcolm's skin prickled. Transmission, signal. These things were talking like they came from television, from broadcast media. "What transmission?" he asked, though he was already backing toward his truck, instinct screaming danger. "The test pattern," another child said. All 12 were facing him now, static bodies flickering in unison. "We're from the test pattern, when stations used to sign off at night, when the broadcast ended and the pattern appeared. We lived there in the static. We were the shapes children saw when they stared at the pattern too long. We were imaginary friends, companions made of visual noise, but then broadcasting changed. Stations went 24 hours. The test pattern ended. We had nowhere to live. We were ejected from the signal into the world, and now we walk highways looking for new signals to inhabit." Malcolm's hand found his truck's door handle. This was insane. These things were claiming to be artifacts from analog television, entities that existed in broadcast static, now wandering Wyoming because their habitat was destroyed. "I can't help you," Malcolm said. "I don't know anything about signals or transmissions." "But you have signals," the first girl said, her voice eager. "Your truck has radio, CB radio, satellite receiver, Bluetooth. You're carrying dozens of frequencies, hundreds of channels. We could live there. We could inhabit your truck's electromagnetic space. Please, mister, we're so tired of walking. We just want to go home." "No." Malcolm climbed into his cab, slammed the door. "Absolutely not. Find someone else." He put the truck in gear, prepared to drive around the children or through them if necessary. They weren't solid, couldn't be. They were projections or hallucinations or something incorporeal. The children moved as one, closing the distance to his truck, pressing against his doors and hood. Where they touched the metal, static spread, crawling across the surface like infection. Malcolm watched in horror as his truck's paint became interference patterns, solid matter transforming into visual noise. The static reached his windshield, began spreading across the glass. He accelerated, breaking through the cluster of children. They shattered like images on old TV screens, fragments of static scattering, but immediately began reforming in his mirrors. Malcolm pushed his speed to 75-80, trying to outrun them. The static on his windshield was growing, crystallizing, obscuring his view. He turned on his wipers. They swept through the static without clearing it, because the static wasn't on the windshield. It was in the glass itself, transforming the material at a molecular level. His CB radio erupted with voices, 12 children speaking simultaneously, their words overlapping. "Let us in, let us in, let us in. We need a home, we need signals. We'll live in your frequencies. We'll be quiet. You won't even notice us. Please, please, please." Malcolm ripped the CB unit out of its mount, threw it out his window. The voices continued, coming from his dashboard speakers, his phone, every audio source in the cab. The static on his windshield was now blocking half his view. Malcolm leaned to the left, trying to see around it, steering blind. Highway 287 was mostly straight here, but curves would come eventually, and he couldn't drive like this. He needed to stop, needed to clear the windshield somehow, but stopping meant the static children would catch up, would surround him, would maybe force their way into his truck entirely. A town appeared ahead. Jeffrey City, population maybe 60, barely alive since the uranium mines closed. Malcolm took the exit, roared down the empty main street looking for help, for anyone awake. The town was dark, abandoned-looking. He pulled into a gas station parking lot, jumped out with a scraper, started attacking the static on his windshield. The scraper passed through the static without affecting it. The glass beneath felt wrong, soft, pliable, like the molecular structure was breaking down. Malcolm punched the windshield in frustration. His fist went through, not breaking the glass but sinking into it, and he felt the static surround his hand, cold, electric, numbing. He yanked his hand back. The static came with it, coating his skin, spreading up his arm. He screamed, tried to wipe it off. It clung like oil, like living television snow, crawling toward his shoulder. Where it touched, his skin lost definition, becoming grainy, pixels of flesh fighting to maintain coherence. Malcolm Gr. grabbed a water bottle from his truck, poured it on his arm. The water passed through the static without washing it away because the static wasn't a coating, it was a transformation. The 12 children appeared, walking down the street toward him, static bodies flickering. "You can't remove us once we start inhabiting," the tall boy said. "We're in your truck systems now. In your phone, your radio, your engine computer. We're spreading through the metal and plastic, making a home. You should be honored. You're carrying passengers now. Invisible passengers who live in your electromagnetic spectrum." Malcolm looked at his arm. The static had stopped spreading, covering only his hand and wrist, but those parts were completely transformed. No longer solid flesh, but visual noise shaped like flesh, grainy approximations of fingers and palm. He could still move them, could still feel through them, but they were no longer entirely real. He was becoming like the children, becoming signal instead of matter. "Change me back," Malcolm demanded. "Get out of my truck, stop doing this, change me back right now or I swear." "You swear what?" the girl asked. "You'll hurt us, we're not physical, we're broadcast entities. You can't hurt television static. You can only watch it, and now we're making you part of the broadcast. Don't fight, accept it. You're transitioning from analog human to digital being. The process takes about 72 hours. After that, you'll exist in both states, physical enough to drive your truck, signal enough to live in frequencies. You'll be like us, a hybrid, a new form of existence." Malcolm ran. His static hand clutched his normal hand, both working together, dragging him away from his truck and the children. He ran down the street, past dark houses, past the abandoned uranium processing facility, into the sagebrush scrubland beyond the town. The static children didn't pursue. They stood by his truck, waiting patiently because they didn't need to chase him. They were already inside him, already in his truck, already spreading through his body at their predicted rate. 72 hours, 3 days. Malcolm checked his phone, 2:37 a.m. The phone screen was corrupted with static, numbers barely visible through interference. The children were in his phone too, inhabiting the device's radio frequencies, its Wi-Fi, its cellular connection. He tried to call 911. The call connected, but when the operator answered, it was a child's voice, static, distorted. "911 is not available in your frequency. Please try again later. Or don't. You'll be one of us soon. Resistance is futile and also boring." Malcolm kept his phone anyway. Even corrupted, it showed time, and he needed to track the 72 hours, needed to know how long he had before transformation completed. He walked through the sagebrush, heading east toward nothing, trying to put distance between himself and his truck. But distance didn't matter. The static was inside him, spreading at a cellular level, and his truck was probably already completely transformed. A vehicle made of visual noise shaped like a Peterbilt. By sunrise, the static had reached his elbow. His entire forearm was grainy interference, still functional but no longer flesh. He could see through it slightly. If he held his hand up to the sun, light passed through the static, creating strange prismatic effects. He was becoming translucent, becoming broadcast material instead of biological material. He reached a ranch house around 8 a.m., knocked on the door with his normal hand, hiding the static arm behind his back. An elderly woman answered. "Help me," Malcolm said. "I need a doctor, hospital, something. I'm sick." She looked at him with blank eyes and said in a child's voice, "There are no doctors for your condition, only time. 61 hours remaining. Then she closed the door. Malcolm backed away, understanding. The static children could speak through anyone near a radio, TV, phone, any device receiving signals. The woman had a television on inside. He'd heard it through the door. The children had used her as a mouthpiece. Malcolm walked for 3 days through Wyoming wilderness, tracking time on his corrupted phone, watching the static spread. By hour 24, it had consumed his entire right arm and was spreading across his chest. By hour 48, his right leg was static. His torso was mostly transformed. His face was beginning to pixelate. He could feel his thoughts becoming different, less linear, more simultaneous, thinking in multiple channels at once, consciousness spreading across frequencies. He wasn't frightened anymore. The fear had dissolved somewhere around hour 36, replaced by a strange acceptance, maybe even curiosity. He was becoming something new, something that existed between physical and electromagnetic. He could sense radio waves now, could feel FM and AM stations broadcasting through the air, could detect cell towers and Wi-Fi routers and SAT. Light signals. The world was full of invisible transmissions, a constant electromagnetic noise that humans couldn't perceive but that the static children lived in, and that Malcolm was learning to inhabit. At hour 71, Malcolm stood on a hill overlooking Highway 287. His body was 90% static, only a few patches of flesh remaining, part of his left arm, a section of his chest, half his face. He could see his truck parked where he'd left it in Jeffrey City, the vehicle now entirely transformed into visual noise shaped like a semi-truck, still functional but no longer physical in any traditional sense. The static children stood around it, waiting for him. At hour 72 exactly, the last of Malcolm's flesh dissolved into static. He stood fully transformed, a human-shaped collection of interference patterns, and discovered he could move differently now. Not walking, broadcasting. He thought about his truck, and instantly he was there, consciousness transmitted across 15 miles in a fraction of a second. The children greeted him. "Welcome to the signal. You're one of us now. You'll drive your routes, haul your cargo, but you'll exist in both worlds, physical enough to interact, signal enough to never be truly present. You're a ghost in the frequency domain. You're a transmission that thinks it's a person. You're new and also ancient because all signals are timeless." Malcolm climbed into his static truck. The controls felt familiar, muscle memory translating to this new form. He started the static engine. It roared with white noise instead of combustion, and pulled onto Highway 287. The 12 children climbed into his trailer, inhabiting the space, making it their home. Malcolm drove north, hauling drilling equipment and passengers made of television interference, existing in the space between matter and transmission. He drives still. Other truckers report seeing him sometimes. A truck that looks normal until you focus on it. Then it becomes fuzzy, indistinct, grainy like an old photograph. He appears on CB radios occasionally, his voice distorted, offering advice or warnings or just talking to fill the silence. He exists in truck stop Wi-Fi networks, in highway surveillance cameras, in the satellite systems that track freight movement. He's everywhere that signals exist, and nowhere that's purely physical. The static children found their home, and Malcolm Torres found a new form of existence. He's a legend now, a story truckers tell about the driver who became television snow, who hauls ghost cargo on phantom highways, who exists in the frequencies between stations, waiting for other drivers to tune in accidentally and hear his voice saying, "Watch out for the static children. If they ask for a ride, say no. Unless you want to become like me." A signal that remembers being human, broadcasting forever through the white noise of Wyoming's empty highways. Story 10. The Way Station That WIGHS. The Way Station sign read, "All trucks must exit at mile marker 156 on Texas's I-20, but beneath the regulation text was something else. Soul weight inspection mandatory. Robert Hayes almost missed it. The second line appeared only in his peripheral vision, vanishing when he looked directly at it. But the instruction was clear, and Robert had been a trucker for 23 years, always obeyed way station signs. So he took the exit at 1:09 a.m., December 30th, 2023, hauling furniture from Dallas to El Paso, 46,000 pounds of tables and chairs and cabinets. Perfectly legal load, nothing to worry about. The way station looked wrong as he approached. Too old architecture from maybe the 1950s, single-story building with lights that flickered and buzzed. Robert had passed this way hundreds of times, remembered this station as modern facility built maybe 5 years ago. But now it was ancient, paint peeling, parking area cracked and weed-infested. A sign over the entrance read, "Texas Department of Transportation, Soul Weight Division. Established 1953. Robert pulled onto the scale, stopped when the light turned red. Through his windshield, he could see into the station office. A man sat at the desk, elderly, wearing a uniform that looked decades out of date. The man gestured for Robert to come inside. Robert set his parking brake, climbed out, walked to the office. The door opened before he touched it. "Registration and logbook," the man said without looking up. His voice sounded like it came from very far away or very deep underground. Robert handed over the documents. The man examined them with eyes that didn't move, didn't blink. "Your cargo weight is acceptable, 46,000 pounds of furniture, but your soul weight is concerning." "My what?" Robert laughed nervously. "Sir, I think there's some confusion." "Your soul weighs 63 pounds. The man interrupted, pointing at a readout Robert hadn't noticed before. An ancient mechanical display show. Wing numbers that clicked and whirred like an old gas pump. "Regulation minimum is 75 pounds. You're 12 pounds underweight. That's a violation. You cannot proceed." Robert stared at the display. The numbers did indeed show 63 lbs in mechanical flip digits. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of initiation for new drivers. I'm not new, I've been driving." "Everyone who enters this station gets weighed. Body weight, cargo weight, and soul weight. Most people pass through not realizing we checked their souls because they're within regulation, but you're underweight. That means you've lost soul mass somewhere along your route. You've left parts of yourself behind, guilt, maybe, or compassion, or humanity. The roads take pieces of us. Usually not enough to matter, but you've lost too much. You're becoming hollow." Robert backed toward the door. This was insane. He needed to leave, get back on I-20, forget this station existed. His hand touched the doorknob. It was cold enough to burn. He yanked his hand back, saw frost forming on his fingers. "Let me go," he said. "I don't consent to this, I'm leaving." "You cannot leave until your soul weight reaches regulation minimum," the man said, still not looking at Robert, eyes fixed on papers that might have been blank. "That's been the law since 1953 when we discovered that trucks driven by hollow men cause disproportionate accidents. Drivers without sufficient soul mass make catastrophic decisions. They fall asleep at the wheel. They drive drunk. They ignore maintenance. They hurt people. So we weigh souls, and we don't let hollow drivers continue until they've restored themselves." "How?" Robert demanded. "How do I restore soul weight? This is absurd, but fine, I'll play along. What do I need to do?" "Remember," the man said simply. "Remember the moments where you lost pieces of yourself. Face them, process them. Carry their weight consciously instead of leaving them scattered on the highways behind you. Every trucker leaves soul fragments on the road, moments of cowardice, moments of cruelty, moments of failure. You've left more than most. 12 pounds worth. Remember them and your soul will reintegrate." The office door locked with a sound like a tomb ceiling. Robert was trapped. He sat in a chair that appeared behind him, its sudden existence not even surprising anymore. "Okay," he said. "I'll remember. Tell me what I'm supposed to remember." "We don't tell you. You know. Deep down, you know exactly which moments cost you parts of your soul. Think Robert Hayes. What have you done that you've spent 23 years trying to forget?" Robert thought. His career had been mostly clean, good safety record, few violations, reliable worker. But as he sat in the cold chair in the impossible office, memories surfaced, moments he'd buried. The time in 2012 when he'd hit a dog on Highway 40, felt the impact, seen the animal in his mirror dragging itself to the shoulder. He'd kept driving, told himself stopping wouldn't help. The dog was already dying. Dee never reported it, never looked back. That was probably a pound of soul, left on Highway 40 in Missouri. The time in 2016 when he'd seen another truck jackknifed on I-10, driver visible through the windshield, clearly alive, clearly needing help. Robert had been running late, cargo time-sensitive, and there were already other vehicles stopping. He'd driven past, convinced himself his help wasn't needed. Later, he'd heard the driver had died waiting for extraction from the wreckage. That was maybe 2 pounds left on I-10 in Arizona. The time in 2019 when his daughter had called, crying, needing him to come home because she'd had a crisis. Robert had been 3 hours out on a 6-hour route, and he'd told her he couldn't turn around, told her to call her mother, told her he'd be home tomorrow. His daughter had said, "I really need you, Dad." And Robert had said, "Tomorrow, sweetie, I promise." His daughter had tried to kill herself that night. Survived, thankfully, but Robert had never forgiven himself for choosing a delivery over his child's life. That was maybe 5 pounds, left somewhere on I-35 in Texas. Smaller moments, too. Cutting off other drivers, aggressive lane changes, road rage incidents where he'd endangered people. Ignoring obviously unsafe equipment because repairs were expensive. Fudging logbook hours, driving exhausted, risking lives including his own. Every trucker did these things sometimes, but Robert had done them often, had accumulated violations and moral failures across 23 years, and each one had cost him fragments of soul mass, until he was 12 pounds under regulation. "I remember," Robert whispered. "All of it. I've been carrying guilt this whole time, but I never faced it, never admitted it, never tried to make amends." "Carrying guilt doesn't count," the man said. "That's just emotional weight, not soul weight, so—" "Soul weight requires action, requires change, requires you to become someone who wouldn't make those choices again. Can you do that? Can you become someone whole?" Robert didn't know. He was 51 years old. His patterns were deeply established. Could he really change at this point? He thought about his daughter, now 26, recovering but scarred. Thought about the dead driver on I-10, the family who'd lost him. Thought about the dog on Highway 40. He couldn't undo those moments, but maybe he could honor them by being different going forward. "I'll try," Robert said. "I'll change, I'll be better. I'll never leave someone behind again. I'll stop when accidents happen. I'll prioritize my family. I'll be a person who deserves to exist fully instead of this hollow thing I've become." The mechanical display clicked and whirred. The numbers changed, 65 lbs, then 67, then 69. Robert's intentions were adding weight, his commitment to change restoring fragments of his scattered soul. The numbers climbed, 71, 73, 74. Robert thought harder about who he wanted to be, made promises to himself and to the universe, committed to atonement and awareness and conscious living. 75 lbs. The display stopped. "Minimum reached," the man said. "You can proceed." But Robert Hayes understand soul weight isn't fixed. You can lose it again. Every bad choice, every moment of cruelty or cowardice costs you fragments. If you ever return to this way station below minimum, we'll impound your truck and your license. You'll never drive again. The roads don't need hollow men. They're dangerous enough without drivers who have lost their humanity. The door unlocked. Robert stood, walked out into the night. His truck was still on the scale, but the ancient way station was gone. In its place was the modern facility Robert remembered, brand new construction, bright lights. The elderly man and the soul weight display had vanished. Robert's registration and logbook sat on his driver's seat. He climbed in, started the engine, pulled back onto I-20. He drove differently now, cautiously, consciously aware of every decision's moral weight. When he saw an accident 3 hours later, he stopped, called 911, stayed until help arrived even though it made him late for delivery. When another truck tried to merge and needed space, Robert slowed, made room, waved them in. He called his daughter when he stopped for fuel, talked for 20 minutes, told her he loved her, told her he was sorry for every time he'd chosen work over her. His dispatcher complained about the late delivery. Robert didn't care. He'd rather lose his job than lose more soul weight. He drove the rest of his career, 7 more years until retirement, as a different person, someone who carried his full weight, someone who faced the cost of his choices. He never saw the soul way station again, but he felt it watching him sometimes, checking his weight from a distance, making sure he stayed above minimum. Other truckers reported seeing the station over the years. Always at night, always appearing suddenly where modern facilities should be, always weighing more than cargo. Most drivers passed through without realizing they'd been checked. But a few got pulled aside, told they were underweight, forced to remember and restore themselves. The ones who succeeded became better drivers, better people. The ones who refused were never seen again. their trucks and lives impounded by the sole weight division, which had been weighing travelers since 1953, keeping hollow people off the highways, protecting everyone from drivers who'd lost their humanity somewhere in the dark miles of American roads. Robert Hayes died in 2037, age 65, retired and at peace. At his funeral, his daughter told stories about how he'd changed in his final years, how he'd become present and caring and conscious. She didn't know about the way station. Robert had never told her. But she knew something had happened on December 30th, 2023. Something that transformed her father from a man who prioritized schedules over people into a man who weighed every decision against its human cost. The Seoul Way Station still stands on I-20 at mile marker 156, waiting for the next underweight driver, ready to force them to remember what they've lost and decide whether they're willing to restore it. The roads take pieces of everyone who travels them. Most people never notice the slow erosion of their humanity. But the Seoul Way Station notices. It measures. It enforces the regulation minimum. It reminds truckers and travelers that we carry more than cargo, that we're responsible for maintaining our own weight, that becoming hollow is a choice we make mile by mile, decision by decision, moment by moment, across all the dark highways of our complicated, consequential lives.